Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the soft glow of the nightlight cast dancing shadows on the walls of Lily's nursery as I gently placed her in her crib. At 18 months old, she was finally sleeping through the night. A small victory that allowed me to reclaim some semblance of normalcy in my life. I smiled down at her cherubic face, her wispy blonde curls framing her peaceful expression. "Sweet dreams, my little angel," I whispered, leaning down to place a soft kiss on her forehead. As I tiptoed out of the room, I glanced at the baby monitor on the dresser, its small red light blinking steadily. A wave of gratitude washed over me for this little device that allowed me to keep an ear out for my daughter while still having some freedom to move about the house. Closing the door with practiced care, I made my way downstairs to the living room where my husband, Mark, was sprawled on the couch, the blue light of the TV flickering across his tired face. "She's down?" he asked, looking up at me with a weary smile. I nodded, collapsing next to him with a sigh. Finally, I thought she'd never settle tonight. Mark wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. "You're amazing, you know that? I don't know how you do it day after day." I chuckled softly, nestling into his embrace. "Trust me, some days I don't know either." We sat in comfortable silence, the low murmur of the TV providing a soothing background noise. I felt my eyelids growing heavy, the exhaustion of the day catching up with me. Just as I was about to suggest we head to bed, a sound from the baby monitor caught my attention. At first it was just a faint whisper, barely audible above the hum of the house. I sat up straighter, straining to hear. "Did you hear that?" I asked Mark, my body tensing. He frowned, cocking his head to listen. "Hear what?" "Shh," I hushed him, reaching for the monitor on the coffee table. I turned up the volume, and that's when I heard it clearly. A voice that wasn't Lily's, that wasn't mine, that wasn't Mark's. "Need to be more careful," the voice said, low and urgent. "We can't risk." The voice faded out, replaced by static, then silence. My heart skipped a beat, a chill racing down my spine. "Mark," I whispered, my voice trembling. "There's someone in Lily's room." Before the words had fully left my mouth, we were both on our feet, racing up the stairs. My mind was a whirlwind of terrifying possibilities. An intruder, a kidnapper, a monster from my worst nightmares come to life. Mark reached Lily's door first, throwing it open with such force that it banged against the wall. I was right behind him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. But the room was still, quiet, undisturbed. Lily lay in her crib, her chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of deep sleep. The window was closed, the curtains drawn. There was no sign that anyone had been in the room. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I heard." We both heard. Mark moved to the window, checking the lock. "It's secure," he reported, then began methodically searching the room, looking under the crib, in the closet, behind the curtains. I stood rooted to the spot, my eyes fixed on Lily. She hadn't stirred, oblivious to the panic that had gripped her parents. "There's no one here, Amanda," Mark said finally, his voice a mixture of relief and confusion. "Are you sure you heard something?" I turned to him, indignation flaring. "Of course I'm sure. You heard it too, didn't you?" He hesitated, and in that moment of silence, doubt began to creep in. Had I imagined it? Was the exhaustion of new motherhood finally taking its toll on my sanity? I'm not sure what I heard," Mark admitted. "It could have been interference, or maybe the neighbors' voices carrying through the walls." I shook my head vehemently. "No, it was clear as day. Someone was talking about being careful, about not risking something." Mark's expression softened and he stepped closer, placing his hands on my shoulders. "Honey, you're exhausted. We both are. Maybe your mind is playing tricks on you. I wanted to argue, to make him understand the certainty of what I'd heard, but exhaustion and self-doubt were already clouding my thoughts. Maybe you're right, I conceded, though the words felt hollow. We did one final check of the room before retreating, leaving Lily's door ajar. As we climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. Try to get some sleep, Mark murmured, kissing my forehead before turning out the light. Everything will look clearer in the morning. But sleep eluded me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the voice in my head. It had been so real, so clear. How could I have imagined it? The hours crept by, marked by the soft ticking of the bedside clock. Every creak of the house settling, every rustle of leaves outside our window, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my system. I found myself straining to hear any sound from the baby monitor, dreading and hoping in equal measure that the voice would return. As the first pale light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, I gave up on sleep entirely. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Mark, and padded down the hallway to Lily's room. She was still sleeping peacefully, one tiny fist curled next to her face. I reached into the crib, gently stroking her cheek. "Mommy's here," I whispered. "I won't let anything happen to you." I sank into the rocking chair next to the crib, my eyes heavy but my mind racing. What if it happened again? What if next time it wasn't just a voice? The what-ifs piled up, each more terrifying than the last. By the time Lily woke, fussing for her morning feed, I had made a decision. I wouldn't dismiss what I'd heard. I couldn't. A mother's instinct was too powerful to ignore. As I nursed Lily, I began to formulate a plan. I would keep a log of any strange occurrences, gather evidence. If it happened again, when it happened again, I would be ready. Mark found us there an hour later, Lily babbling happily in my lap as I scribbled in a notebook. "You're up early," he remarked, leaning against the doorframe. "Everything okay?" I looked up at him, seeing the concern in his eyes. I wanted to confide in him, to share the fear that was gnawing at me, but I hesitated. He already thought I was overreacting. Until I had proof, it was better to keep my suspicions to myself. "Everything's fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just getting an early start on the day." As Mark nodded and headed downstairs to start the coffee, I looked down at Lily, then at the baby monitor on the dresser. Its red light blinked steadily. A silent sentinel. "I know what I heard," I whispered to myself. "A promise and a challenge. And I'll figure out what's going on no matter what it takes." The day stretched ahead, filled with the normal routines of caring for Lily, but underneath it all, a current of unease persisted. Every time I passed the baby monitor, every time I entered Lily's room, I found myself holding my breath, waiting for the whispers to begin again. The days following that first unsettling night blurred together in a haze of heightened vigilance and growing paranoia. I found myself jumping at every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows. The baby monitor became both my obsession and my tormentor, its innocuous red light a constant reminder of the inexplicable voices I'd heard. It was a week later when it happened again. I was in the kitchen, mechanically chopping vegetables for dinner, my ears attuned to the soft static of the monitor on the counter. Lily was napping upstairs and Mark was still at work. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. Then, cutting through the silence like a knife, I heard it. "Getting suspicious. We need to be more careful." The knife clattered from my hand, the sharp blade narrowly missing my foot as it hit the floor. I lunged for the monitor, cranking up the volume, my heart pounding in my chest. What about the child? If she... The voice cut off abruptly, replaced by the soft, steady breathing of my sleeping daughter. I stood frozen, my hands shaking as they gripped the monitor. This time, there was no doubt. The voices were real, and they were talking about Lily. I bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, my motherly instinct overriding any sense of caution. I burst into Lily's room, half expecting to find intruders looming over her crib. But just like before, the room was empty save for my peacefully sleeping child. I sank to my knees beside the crib, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. What was happening? Who were these voices, and what did they want with my daughter? As the initial shock wore off, I fumbled for my phone, dialing Mark's number with trembling fingers. It rang once, twice, 3 times before he picked up. "Amanda? Is everything okay?" His voice was tinged with concern. I rarely called him at work. "It happened again," I blurted out, my voice barely above a whisper. "The voices. They were talking about us, about Lily. Mark, I'm scared." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mark spoke again, his tone was measured, careful. "Honey, are you sure? Maybe you were dozing off and—" "I wasn't asleep," I snapped, frustration bubbling up inside me. "I know what I heard. Why won't you believe me?" I could almost hear him running his hand through his hair, a habit he had when he was stressed. "Amanda, I'm not saying I don't believe you, it's just, this is a lot to process. Have you considered that maybe you're under a lot of stress? Being a new mom isn't easy and—" "Don't." I cut him off, my voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare suggest I'm imagining this because I'm stressed. I'm not crazy, Mark." "I never said you were," he replied quickly. "Look, I'll be home in an hour. We'll talk about this then, okay? Just try to stay calm, for Lily's sake." I ended the call without saying goodbye, anger and hurt warring inside me. How could he dismiss me so easily? I looked down at Lily, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing around her. In that moment, I made a decision. If Mark wouldn't help me, I'd find someone who would. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. It rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. "Amanda, it's been ages, how are you?" "Sarah," I said, relief washing over me at the sound of my best friend's voice. "I need your help. Can you come over?" There must have been something in my tone that conveyed the urgency of the situation because Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. True to her word, Sarah arrived exactly 20 minutes later, her face etched with concern as I ushered her inside. "Okay, Spill," she said as soon as we were seated on the couch. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. The first night I heard the voices, Mark's dismissal, and the conversation I'd overheard today. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Amanda," she said finally, her voice gentle. "I believe you." Those 3 words nearly undid me. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, the tension of the past week finally finding release. Sarah pulled me into a hug, and I let myself cry, the fear and frustration pouring out of me. "Thank you," I whispered when I'd finally composed myself. I was starting to think I was going crazy. Sarah shook her head firmly. "You're not crazy. Something strange is definitely going on here. But we need evidence if we're going to convince Mark and figure out what's happening." "Evidence?" I repeated, wiping my eyes. "How do we get that?" A determined glint appeared in Sarah's eye. "We set up a camera in Lily's room. If these voices are real, we'll catch them on video." The idea was so simple, so obvious, that I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of it myself. "Sarah, you're a genius." We spent the next hour setting up Sarah's spare laptop in Lily's room, positioning it carefully to capture the entire space. We had just finished when we heard the front door open. "Amanda?" Mark's voice called from downstairs. "I'm home." I exchanged a glance with Sarah. "Ready for this?" she asked. I nodded, squaring my shoulders. As I'll ever be. We descended the stairs to find Mark in the living room, his tie loosened and a wary expression on his face. His eyebrows rose in surprise when he saw Sarah. "Sarah? I didn't know you were coming over." "I called her," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk, Mark." For the next hour, we talked. I recounted the day's events again with Sarah backing me up. Mark listened, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he sighed heavily. Amanda, I'm sorry I didn't take you seriously before. I didn't want to believe that something could be threatening our family. I know, I said softly, reaching out to take his hand. But ignoring it won't make it go away. We need to face this together. Mark nodded, squeezing my hand. So, what's our next move? Sarah explained about the camera we'd set up, and Mark agreed it was a good idea. As she was leaving, Sarah pulled me aside. Call me the second anything happens, okay? Day or night. I hugged her tightly. I will. Thank you, Sarah. For everything. That night, as Mark and I lay in bed, the laptop quietly recording in Lily's room, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. Part of me hoped we'd catch something on camera, proving once and for all that I wasn't imagining things. But another part of me, a primal, maternal part, hoped that the night would pass in peace. I must have eventually drifted off because the next thing I knew, I was jolting awake, my heart racing. For a moment, I couldn't understand what had woken me. Then I heard it. Lily's frightened cry, followed by an unfamiliar voice through the baby monitor. Shh, little one. We don't want to wake your parents, do we? I was out of bed in an instant, shaking Mark awake. Mark, there's someone in Lily's room. We raced down the hallway, terror lending speed to our feet. I burst through the door, flicking on the light, ready to confront whoever was threatening my child. But the room was empty. Lily stood in her crib, tears streaming down her face, her arms outstretched towards us. I scooped her up, holding her close, my eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of an intruder. There's no one here, Mark said, his voice shaky as he checked the closet and under the crib. I looked at the laptop, its camera light blinking steadily. Check the footage, I said urgently. It must have caught something. Mark nodded, moving to the computer. I watched over his shoulder, Lily hiccuping softly in my arms, as he rewound the video. There, on the screen, we saw Lily sleeping peacefully. Then at 3:17 a.m. she stirred, sitting up in her crib. A moment later she began to cry, reaching out toward something off camera. But there was nothing there. No intruder, no mysterious figure. Just our daughter, apparently crying and reaching out to thin air. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice trembling. We heard a voice. I know we did. Mark turned to me, his face pale in the dim light. Amanda, he said slowly, I think it's time we get some help. Professional help. As the implications of his words sank in, I felt a chill run down my spine. The camera was supposed to provide answers, to prove I wasn't imagining things. Instead, it had only deepened the mystery, and possibly my husband's doubts about my sanity. I looked down at Lily, now calm in my arms, then back at the laptop screen showing her distress. Whatever was happening, whatever these voices were, one thing was clear. This was far from over, and I was more determined than ever to get to the bottom of it, no matter the cost. The days following the incident in Lily's room were filled with a tense, uneasy silence. Mark and I moved around each other like wary strangers, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy between us. I could see the concern in his eyes mixed with something else. Doubt, perhaps even fear, not of the mysterious voices, but of what they might mean for my mental state. It was on the third day that I finally broke the silence. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the remains of our barely touched breakfast scattered between us. Lily babbled happily in her high chair, oblivious to the tension surrounding her parents. We need help, Mark, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Professional help. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. You mean a therapist? I shook my head, pushing away the sting of his assumption. No. I mean someone who can investigate what's happening, someone who deals with unusual occurrences. Mark's brow furrowed. You want to hire a ghost hunter? Amanda, come on. This isn't some TV show. Then what do you suggest? I snapped, my patience wearing thin. That we just ignore it? Wait until something happens to Lily? At the mention of our daughter's name, Mark's expression softened. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay. If that's what you think we need to do, then let's do it. But where do we even start looking for someone like that?" I squeezed his hand, relief washing over me. "I've already found someone. His name is Dr. Ethan Carter. He's a parapsychologist who specializes in unexplained phenomena. I called him yesterday." Mark's eyebrows shot up. "You did? Without talking to me first?" I pulled my hand away, defensive. "I had to do something, Mark. You weren't exactly being supportive." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'm scared, Amanda. Not of ghosts or whatever this is, but of what it's doing to us. To you." I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "I'm scared too," I admitted. "But that's why we need to face this. Together." Mark nodded, a determined look settling over his features. "All right, when is this Dr. Carter coming?" "Tonight," I said. He said the sooner he could observe the environment, the better. The rest of the day passed in a blur of nervous energy. We cleaned the house from top to bottom, though I'm not sure why we thought a parapsychologist would care about dust bunnies. As evening approached, I found myself pacing the living room, jumping at every car that passed by on our quiet street. Finally, at precisely 8 p.m., the doorbell rang. Mark answered it, ushering in a man who looked nothing like the ghost hunter I had imagined. Dr. Ethan Carter was in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a tweed jacket over a crisp white shirt, looking more like a college professor than a paranormal investigator. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," he greeted us warmly, shaking our hands. "Thank you for inviting me into your home. I understand you've been experiencing some unusual phenomena." I nodded, gesturing for him to take a seat. "Yes, we've been hearing voices through our daughter's baby monitor. Voices that shouldn't be there." Dr. Carter listened intently as we recounted the events of the past week, his expression thoughtful. When we finished, he leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. "What you're describing is certainly intriguing," he said. "Have you considered the possibility of radio interference? Baby monitors can sometimes pick up signals from other wireless devices." "We thought of that," Mark said. "But these voices, they seem to be responding to what's happening in the room. They've mentioned our daughter specifically." Dr. Carter nodded. "I see. Well, the first step is to rule out any natural explanations. I'd like to set up some equipment in your daughter's room, if that's all right. Audio recorders, EMF detectors, that sort of thing." We agreed, and for the next hour, we watched as Dr. Carter transformed Lily's nursery into something resembling a sci-fi movie set. Blinking devices were placed strategically around the room, and a small camera was set up in the corner. "Now, Doctor," Carter said as we gathered in the hallway outside Lily's room, "I suggest we go about our evening as normally as possible. The equipment will record any unusual activity. If you hear anything out of the ordinary, please let me know immediately." We retreated downstairs, the tension in the air palpable. Dr. Carter engaged us in small talk, asking about our jobs and how long we'd lived in the house. I appreciated his attempt to put us at ease, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. Hours ticked by with no activity. Lily had long since been put to bed, and even Mark was starting to nod off on the couch. I was just about to suggest we call it a night when a crackle of static burst from the baby monitor. We all froze, eyes locked on the small device. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, clear as day, a voice spoke. "The child is awake. We need to act now." I was on my feet in an instant, but Dr. Carter held up a hand, stopping me. "Wait," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Let's listen." Another voice joined the first, sounding agitated. "It's too risky. If the parents hear, we don't have a choice," the first voice interrupted. This may be our only chance to... The voice cut off abruptly, replaced by Lily's frightened cry. Unable to contain myself any longer, I bolted up the stairs, Mark and Dr. Carter hot on my heels. I burst into Lily's room, flicking on the light. My daughter stood in her crib, tears streaming down her face, her arms outstretched towards... nothing. The room was empty save for us and Dr. Carter's equipment, which blinked and whirred in the corners. I scooped Lily into my arms, murmuring soothing words as I checked her for any signs of harm. Mark circled the room, peering into every corner, his face a mask of confusion and fear. Dr. Carter moved to his equipment, fingers flying over keyboards and adjusting dials. After a few moments, he turned to us, his expression grave. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," he said slowly, "I owe you an apology. When you first contacted me, I'll admit I was skeptical. But what we just witnessed, it's unlike anything I've encountered in my career." "What does it mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What's happening to our daughter?" Dr. Carter shook his head. "I'm not sure yet, but I can tell you this. The voices we heard were not the result of radio interference or any other natural phenomenon I'm aware of. Something truly unusual is occurring in your home." Mark sank onto the edge of Lily's bed, his face pale. "So what do we do now?" "Now," Dr. Carter said, a determined glint in his eye, "we dig deeper. With your permission, I'd like to bring in some colleagues. We need to monitor this situation around the clock. Whatever these entities are, whatever they want with your daughter, we need to find out, and fast." As I held Lily close, feeling her tiny heart beating against my chest, a mix of emotions washed over me. Fear, certainly, but also a strange sense of vindication. I wasn't crazy. The voices were real, but that realization brought with it a new, terrifying question. If the voices were real, what did they want with my child? I looked at Mark, seeing my own fear and determination mirrored in his eyes. Then I turned to Dr. Carter and nodded. "Do whatever you need to do. Just help us protect our daughter." As Dr. Carter began making calls, setting in motion an investigation that would change our lives forever, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something vast and unknown. Whatever came next, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The days following Dr. Carter's initial investigation blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. Our home had been transformed into a high-tech surveillance center, with cameras and sensors in every room. Dr. Carter's team worked in shifts, monitoring the equipment around the clock, while Mark and I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Lily's sake. It was on the 5th day that Dr. Carter called us into the makeshift command center they'd set up in our guest room. His face was etched with a mixture of excitement and bewilderment as he gestured for us to take a seat. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," he began, his voice tinged with barely contained enthusiasm, "I believe we've made a breakthrough." I leaned forward, my heart racing. "You know what the voices are?" He shook his head. "Not exactly, but we've managed to isolate the frequency they're broadcasting on. And here's the interesting part. It's not supernatural in origin. It's a very specific radio frequency, one typically used by certain types of wireless home devices." Mark's brow furrowed. "Are you saying our haunting is technological?" Dr. Carter nodded. "It appears so, which means the source is likely very close by, possibly even in this neighborhood." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, quickly followed by confusion and a touch of embarrassment. All this time, had we been jumping at shadows created by someone's faulty electronics? "So, what do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Carter's expression turned serious. "We need to locate the source. It's possible that whoever is unknowingly broadcasting these signals is in the dark about this situation. I suggest we start by talking to your neighbors." The idea of confronting our neighbors about this bizarre situation sent a jolt of anxiety through me. How would we even begin to explain? Mark must have sensed my hesitation because he reached over and squeezed my hand. We'll do it together, he said softly. We need answers, Amanda. I nodded, taking a deep breath to steel myself. Okay, let's do it. We decided to start with the house directly next door. As we stood on their porch, my hand poised to knock, I felt a flutter of nervousness in my stomach. What if they thought we were crazy? What if they were offended by our accusations? Before I could voice my doubts, Mark rapped firmly on the door. For a moment, there was silence. Then we heard footsteps approaching. The door swung open to reveal a woman in her mid-30s, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She smiled warmly, though there was a hint of confusion in her eyes. Hello, she said. Can I help you? I realized with a start that despite living next door for over a year, we had never properly introduced ourselves. The isolation of new parenthood had turned us into accidental hermits. Hi, I said, forcing a smile. I'm Amanda, and this is my husband, Mark. We live next door and, well, this is going to sound strange, but we need to talk to you about something important. The woman's eyebrows rose slightly, but her smile remained in place. I'm Sarah, she replied. And this is my husband, Tom, she added as a man appeared behind her. Please come in. As we stepped into their living room, I couldn't help but notice how normal everything looked. No strange devices or blinking lights, just a cozy, lived-in space that spoke of a happy family life. So, Tom said as we all settled onto the couches, what's this important matter? Mark and I exchanged a glance. How do you tell your neighbors you think they might be accidentally haunting your baby? I took a deep breath and launched into our story, trying to keep my voice steady as I recounted the mysterious voices, our fears for Lily, and Dr. Carter's investigation. As I spoke, I watched Sarah and Tom's expressions change from polite interest to confusion to outright disbelief. When I finished, there was a moment of heavy silence. Then, to my utter shock, Tom burst out laughing. Oh my God, he gasped between chuckles. Sarah, the baby monitor? Sarah's eyes widened in realization, and she clapped a hand over her mouth, her shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Mark and I exchanged bewildered glances. This was not the reaction we had expected. I'm sorry, Tom said, wiping tears from his eyes as he tried to compose himself. We're not laughing at you, I promise. It's just... Well, come with me. I think we can explain everything. Still chuckling, Tom led us upstairs to what appeared to be a home office. As we entered, I gasped. The room was filled with computer screens, cameras, and various electronic devices, a setup that rivaled Dr. Carter's command center in our guest room. Welcome to our smart home hub, Tom said, gesturing around the room. I work in IT, and I've been experimenting with home automation. Everything in our house is connected. Lights, thermostats, security cameras, you name it. Sarah stepped forward, a sheepish smile on her face. And that includes our own baby monitor. We have a 2-year-old Jake. He's with my parents this week, but we've been using the monitor to keep an eye on the cat while we're at work. Realization dawned on me. So the voices we've been hearing were probably us, Tom finished. Checking in on the cat, talking about work, that sort of thing. The system must be broadcasting on the same frequency as your baby monitor. I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. Relief, embarrassment, and a touch of lingering fear. But what about the voices mentioning Lily and saying they needed to act now? Tom's brow furrowed as he tapped at one of the keyboards. Let me check our logs. Here we go. Last Tuesday night, we were watching a pretty intense crime drama. There was a subplot about a kidnapping. We must have been commenting on the show during a tense moment. And the cat's name is Lily, Sarah added. She's been trying to get into Jake's old baby toys. We were probably talking about moving them before she made a mess. I sank into a nearby chair, feeling lightheaded. All this time, all our fear and sleepless nights, had been caused by a simple technical glitch and a series of coincidences. Mark let out a long, shaky breath. I can't believe it. We were so scared for Lily. Sarah moved to my side, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry you've been going through this. If we had any idea..." I looked up at her, seeing genuine concern in her eyes. Despite the absurdity of the situation, I felt a sudden rush of gratitude for these neighbors we had barely known an hour ago. "It's not your fault," I said, managing a weak smile. "We should have introduced ourselves ages ago. Maybe then we could have avoided this whole mess." Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Tell you what, why don't we have dinner together tomorrow night? We can get to know each other properly, and I'll show you how to adjust your baby monitor to avoid picking up our signal in the future." As we made our way back home, relief and exhaustion battling for dominance, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. We had been terrified of ghosts, only to discover our haunting was nothing more than the modern world's version of crossed telephone lines. Dr. Carter took the news with surprising grace, even chuckling as we recounted our conversation with Sarah and Tom. "Well," he said, packing up his equipment, "I suppose not every mystery has a supernatural explanation, but I'm glad we got to the bottom of it." That night, as Mark and I lay in bed, Lily sleeping peacefully in her crib, with the baby monitor turned off for the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "You know," Mark said, pulling me close, "in a weird way, I'm almost grateful for this whole experience." I propped myself up on one elbow, raising an eyebrow. "Grateful for thinking our daughter was being haunted?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not that part. But think about it. We've met our neighbors, made new friends. We're not as isolated as we were before. Maybe this was the wake-up call we needed to reconnect with the world around us." As I settled back into his embrace, I had to admit he had a point. Our ordeal had been terrifying, but it had also pushed us out of our comfort zone, forcing us to reach out and make connections. "You're right," I murmured, feeling sleep starting to tug at me. "But next time we want to meet the neighbors, let's just bake them a cake or something. No more ghost hunts." Mark's laughter rumbled through his chest, and I felt myself smiling as I drifted off to sleep. Tomorrow we would have dinner with our new friends. We would laugh about our misunderstanding, share stories about our children, and begin to build the kind of community we had been missing. And if in the dark of night I heard a strange voice over the baby monitor, well, I'd know it was just Sarah and Tom checking in on their cat named Lily. No ghosts, no haunting, just the comforting sounds of life in a connected world. The weeks following our discovery of the true source of the haunting passed in a whirlwind of newfound friendship and community. Sarah and Tom quickly became fixtures in our lives, our families sharing meals, swapping parenting stories, and laughing about the absurdity of our initial meeting. One balmy Saturday evening, we found ourselves gathered in their backyard for a barbecue. The smell of grilling burgers filled the air as Tom manned the grill, regaling us with tales of his latest smart home experiments. "I'm telling you," he said, flipping a patty with practiced ease, "soon I'll have the whole house responding to voice commands. It'll be like living in the future." Mark chuckled, taking a sip of his beer. "Just make sure you don't accidentally order your house to lock us all out." As the men bantered, I sat with Sarah on the patio, watching Lily and Jake play in a small inflatable pool. The sight of my daughter splashing and giggling with her new friend warmed my heart. "It's amazing how quickly they've bonded," Sarah remarked, a soft smile playing on her lips. I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for how things had turned out. "I know. It's like they've known each other their whole lives." Sarah turned to me, her expression growing serious. "Amanda, I can't tell you how glad I am that we cleared up that misunderstanding. I still feel terrible about all the stress we caused you." I waved off her concern. "Please don't worry about it. If anything, we should be thanking you. This whole experience has been eye-opening." As the evening wore on and the kids were put to bed, Lily in Jake's old portable crib, the four of us settled around the patio table, the conversation flowing as easily as the wine. It was during a lull in the chatter that I noticed Sarah and Tom exchange a meaningful glance. "Everything okay?" I asked, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Sarah took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. Actually, there's something we wanted to talk to you both about. We've been trying to find the right moment. Tom reached over, placing his hand over hers. We trust you, he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. And after everything we've been through together, we feel like you might be the only ones who could understand. Mark leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. What's going on? Are you two okay? Sarah bit her lip, then seemed to steel herself. Remember how we explained about our smart home setup? How we use it to keep an eye on things when we're not here? We nodded, and she continued. Well, a few nights ago, we heard something unusual through the system. At first, we thought it was just interference, maybe even your baby monitor again. But then, her voice trailed off, and Tom picked up the thread. We heard voices. Voices that shouldn't have been there. And before you ask, no, it wasn't the TV or radio. These voices were talking about us, about our home. A chill ran down my spine, memories of our own ordeal flooding back. What did they say? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. They were discussing our security system, talking about blind spots and vulnerabilities. It sounded like they were planning something. Mark's posture stiffened. Have you called the police? Tom shook his head. With what evidence? A couple of disembodied voices that may or may not have been picked up by our own surveillance system. They'd think we were crazy. Or worse, Sarah added. They'd think we were paranoid and making it up. We could get in trouble for false reporting. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. The situation was eerily familiar, yet fundamentally different. This wasn't a case of crossed signals or misunderstood conversations. This sounded like a genuine threat. What do you need from us? I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Sarah and Tom exchanged another glance before Tom spoke. We were wondering if you'd be willing to help us investigate. You've been through something similar and you have connections with that paranormal investigator. Maybe he could lend us some equipment. I felt Mark tense beside me, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. We had just put our own ordeal behind us. Did we really want to dive into another mystery? But as I looked at Sarah and Tom, saw the fear and hope in their eyes, I knew we couldn't turn our backs on them. They had helped us, inadvertently caused our problem, and then helped us solve it. We owed them this much at least. Of course we'll help, I said, reaching out to squeeze Sarah's hand. Whatever you need. Mark nodded in agreement, though I could see the reservation in his eyes. We're here for you, but let's approach this carefully. We don't want to jump to conclusions or put ourselves in danger. Tom visibly relaxed, relief washing over his features. Thank you. You have no idea how much this means to us. We spent the next hour discussing strategy. Tom walked us through the layout of their smart home system, pointing out potential vulnerabilities. Sarah shared a recording of the voices they had heard, the muffled words sending shivers down my spine. As the night grew late and we prepared to head home, I pulled Sarah into a tight hug. We'll figure this out, I promised, together. Back in our own house, as we checked on Lily one last time before bed, Mark turned to me, his expression troubled. Are you sure about this, Amanda? We're not detectives or security experts. What if we're getting in over our heads? I sighed, gently closing Lily's door. I know it's risky, but Sarah and Tom are our friends. We can't just leave them to face this alone. Besides, I added with a wry smile, after everything we've been through, don't you think we're uniquely qualified to handle a little mystery? Mark chuckled, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. I just hope we're not trading one set of ghostly voices for another, more dangerous kind. As we settled into bed, my mind raced with possibilities. Who were these mysterious voices? What were they planning? And how could we, a group of ordinary suburbanites, hope to uncover the truth? I tossed and turned, sleep eluding me. Around 3 a.m. I gave up and crept downstairs, careful not to wake Mark or Lily. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the quiet street. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in Sarah and Tom's driveway. A shadow that shouldn't have been there, moving with purpose towards their front door. My heart raced as I fumbled for my phone, dialing Sarah's number with trembling fingers. It rang once, twice, 3 times before her groggy voice answered. "Amanda, what's wrong?" "Sarah, listen to me," I whispered urgently. "There's someone outside your house. I think they're trying to break in." I heard a sharp intake of breath, then rustling as Sarah presumably woke Tom. "Are you sure?" she asked, fear evident in her voice. "Positive. Call the police now. I'm going to wake Mark." As I ended the call and raced upstairs to wake my husband, a chilling thought struck me. The voices Sarah and Tom had heard weren't just random interference or harmless chatter. They were real, and they were here. Our quiet suburban life had just taken a dangerous turn, and I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. As I shook Mark awake and heard sirens in the distance, one thought echoed in my mind. What had we gotten ourselves into? The wail of sirens pierced the night as police cars screeched to a halt in front of Sarah and Tom's house. Mark and I stood on our front porch, hearts pounding as we watched the scene unfold. Officers swarmed the property, flashlights cutting through the darkness. "I don't see anyone," Mark muttered, squinting into the shadows. "Are you sure you saw something, Amanda?" I nodded, my eyes never leaving our neighbor's house. "I know what I saw. There was someone there." After what felt like an eternity, we saw Sarah and Tom emerge from their front door, speaking animatedly with a police officer. Sarah caught sight of us and waved us over. As we approached, I could hear Tom's frustrated voice. "I'm telling you, officer, this isn't just some random break-in attempt. We've been hearing voices, strange conversations. Someone's been watching us." The officer, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, sighed. "Mr. Walker, we've done a thorough search of the property. There's no sign of forced entry, no footprints, nothing to indicate anyone was here." "But our neighbor saw someone," Sarah interjected, gesturing towards me. "Tell him, Amanda." All eyes turned to me, and I felt a sudden wave of uncertainty. Had I really seen someone, or had my overwrought imagination conjured a threat from the shadows? I took a deep breath. I was up late, couldn't sleep. I saw a figure in the driveway moving towards the house. It looked purposeful. The officer jotted something in his notebook. "And you're sure it wasn't just a neighbor taking a late-night walk? Or maybe a large animal?" I hesitated, doubt creeping in. "I'm not sure. It was dark and I only saw it for a moment." I could see the disappointment in Sarah's eyes, the frustration in Tom's clenched jaw. The officer closed his notebook. "Look, folks, we take all calls seriously. But without any evidence of a crime, there's not much more we can do tonight. I suggest you all get some rest. If you see or hear anything else suspicious, don't hesitate to call us again." As the police cars pulled away, leaving us standing in the quiet street, an uncomfortable silence fell over our group. Tom was the first to break it. "You believe us, don't you?" he asked, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "We're not making this up." Mark placed a reassuring hand on Tom's shoulder. "Of course we believe you. We've been through something similar, remember? We know how real these things can feel." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warm night air. "What do we do now? I don't feel safe in our own home anymore." I felt a pang of guilt. Had I made things worse by calling the police? Or by not being more certain about what I'd seen? "Why don't you stay with us tonight?" I offered. "We have a spare room and it might help to not be alone." Sarah and Tom exchanged a glance before nodding gratefully. As we made our way back to our house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The rest of the night passed fitfully. None of us got much sleep, jumping at every creak and groan of the house settling. As dawn broke, we gathered in the kitchen, nursing cups of strong coffee. "We need to figure this out," Tom said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "I can't live like this, always looking over my shoulder." Sarah nodded, her usual vibrant energy dimmed by exhaustion and fear. Maybe we should set up more cameras. Increase our security? I chewed my lip, considering. What about Dr. Carter? He helped us before. Maybe he could lend his expertise? Mark, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Before we do anything drastic, I think we need to consider all possibilities. Tom, Sarah, is there anyone who might have a reason to target you? An unhappy client, a disgruntled employee, anyone? Tom's brow furrowed. Not that I can think of. My work in IT is pretty straightforward, and Sarah's a teacher. We're not exactly making enemies left and right. As we brainstormed potential explanations, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from my friend Liz, who lived a few blocks away. Everything okay? She wrote. Saw police cars last night. Neighborhood gossip says there was a break-in attempt. I stared at the message, a thought forming. Guys, I said slowly, what if we're not the only ones experiencing this? I showed them the text explaining my theory. What if these voices and strange occurrences aren't just happening to you? What if it's affecting the whole neighborhood? Sarah's eyes widened. That would explain why the police seem so dismissive. If they've been getting multiple calls with no evidence. We need to talk to the neighbors, Tom said, a hint of his old enthusiasm returning. If we can gather more accounts, maybe we can build a stronger case. We spent the next few hours going door to door, discreetly asking our neighbors if they'd experienced anything unusual lately. The responses were a mixed bag. Some dismissed us outright, while others seemed hesitant, as if they'd been waiting for someone to ask. Mrs. Abernathy, an elderly widow 2 doors down, invited us in for tea. As she poured, her hands trembled slightly. I thought I was going senile, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I keep hearing voices, conversations that aren't there. My son wanted to put me in a home, but I swear I'm not imagining it. By midday, we had collected a dozen similar accounts. Strange voices, unexplained noises, shadows seen from the corner of the eye. It was clear that something was affecting our entire community. As we regrouped in our living room, surrounded by notes and hastily drawn maps, a somber mood settled over us. So what now? Mark asked, voicing the question we were all thinking. Do we go back to the police, try to convince them that there's a neighborhood-wide problem? Sarah shook her head. With what proof? We have a bunch of anecdotes, most of which sound like the ramblings of sleep-deprived suburbanites. They'll think we're starting some kind of mass hysteria. I felt a headache building behind my eyes. We were so close to understanding what was happening, yet the truth seemed to slip away every time we reached for it. That's when we heard it. A sharp cry from outside, followed by the sound of breaking glass. We rushed to the window just in time to see a figure darting across our front lawn, disappearing into the shadows of the neighboring house. Call the police, Tom shouted, already heading for the door. Mark was right behind him. Wait, I cried, fear gripping my heart. It could be dangerous. But they were already out the door, giving chase. Sarah and I exchanged a panicked look before following, our hearts pounding in our chests. As we rounded the corner of the house, we saw Mark and Tom struggling with a hooded figure. In the chaos, the person's hood fell back, revealing a face that made us all freeze in shock. It was Jake, Sarah, and Tom's teenage son, who was supposed to be away at summer camp. Jake? Sarah's voice was a mixture of confusion and relief. What are you doing here? Jake's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. As we ushered Jake inside, my mind raced. What did he mean? How was he connected to everything that had been happening? Seated in our living room, Jake's story tumbled out in a rush of words and tears. He'd been experimenting with his father's smart home system, using it to play elaborate pranks on the neighborhood. The voices, the strange occurrences. All of it had been Jake, using the interconnected devices to create a web of fear and confusion. I just wanted to make things more exciting, he explained, his voice small and ashamed. I didn't think anyone would take it so seriously. And then it just It got out of hand. I couldn't stop. The silence that followed his confession was deafening. I looked around the room, seeing the shock and disbelief on everyone's faces. All our fear, all our sleepless nights, had been caused by a teenager's misguided prank. As the initial shock wore off, a new dilemma presented itself. What do we do now? Do we tell the police, potentially ruining Jake's future? Do we inform the neighbors, risking their anger and potential legal action? Or do we keep this secret, allowing Jake a chance to learn from his mistake without life-altering consequences? The weight of this decision hung heavy in the air as we all grappled with our own moral compasses. As I looked at Jake's tear-stained face, at Sarah and Tom's conflicted expressions, I realized that sometimes the hardest mysteries to solve are the ones that force us to question our own values. Whatever we decided, one thing was clear. Our quiet suburban life would never be the same again. The living room was thick with tension as we all stared at Jake, still trying to process his confession. Sarah was the first to break the silence, her voice trembling with a mixture of relief and anger. "Jake, do you have any idea what you've put us through? What you've put the entire neighborhood through?" Jake hung his head, unable to meet his mother's gaze. "I'm sorry, Mom. I never meant for it to go this far. It was just supposed to be a harmless prank." Tom, who had been pacing the room, suddenly stopped and turned to face his son. Harmless. Jake, people were terrified. We thought we were being stalked, that our lives were in danger. How could you think this was okay? I watched as Jake seemed to shrink under the weight of his parents' words. Despite the anger I felt at being manipulated, a part of me couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for the teenager. He'd made a terrible mistake, but he was just a kid who'd gotten in way over his head. Mark, ever the voice of reason, stepped in. "Before we go any further, I think we need to decide what we're going to do about this. Do we involve the authorities, the neighbors?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. I could see the conflict on everyone's faces as they weighed the options. Sarah took a deep breath, her teacher instincts kicking in. "Jake, I want you to go upstairs to the guest room and stay there while we discuss this. We'll call you down when we've made a decision." As Jake trudged up the stairs, the weight of his actions visible in the slump of his shoulders, we gathered around the dining table. It felt like a war council, each of us grappling with our own thoughts on how to proceed. "We have to tell the police," Tom said firmly. "What Jake did was illegal. He caused panic in the entire neighborhood. There have to be consequences." Sarah nodded reluctantly. "I agree that there need to be consequences, but involving the police could ruin Jake's future. He's only 16. A record could follow him for the rest of his life." I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly on the table. "What about the neighbors? Don't they deserve to know the truth? We've all been living in fear for weeks." Mark rubbed his temples, his brow furrowed in concentration. "If we tell the neighbors, it's only a matter of time before someone calls the police anyway. And there's the potential for civil lawsuits. Some people might claim emotional distress or loss of work hours due to the stress Jake caused." We went back and forth for what felt like hours, each option seeming to lead to more problems. As the discussion grew heated, I found myself stepping back, observing the scene before me. Here we were, 4 adults, struggling to find the right path forward. If we were having this much trouble, how must Jake be feeling? Suddenly, an idea struck me. "Wait," I said, holding up a hand to pause the debate. "What if we let Jake be part of the solution?" All eyes turned to me, a mixture of confusion and curiosity on their faces. I took a deep breath and continued. "Jake caused this problem, yes. But he's also the one who understands exactly what he did and how he did it. What if, instead of just punishing him, we make him take responsibility for fixing what he broke?" Tom's eyebrows shot up. "What are you suggesting?" "We have Jake confess to the neighborhood," I explained, the plan forming as I spoke. But not just a simple apology. He explains exactly what he did, how he did it, and then he offers to help secure everyone's smart home systems to prevent something like this from happening again. He could turn this into an educational opportunity for the whole community. Sarah's eyes lit up. That could actually work. It would be a form of restorative justice. Jake would have to face the consequences of his actions, but in a way that allows him to make amends. Mark nodded slowly. And it would give the neighbors closure without necessarily involving the authorities. They'd know they weren't crazy or being targeted. Tom still looked skeptical. But what about punishment? He can't just get away with this. Who says this isn't punishment? I countered. Jake will have to face every person he's scared and deceived. He'll have to work to regain their trust. That's not an easy thing to do, especially for a teenager. As we discussed the details of the plan, I could see the tension in the room slowly dissipating. We weren't just deciding Jake's fate. We were finding a way to heal our community. Finally, after hammering out the specifics, we called Jake back downstairs. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed from crying. He stood before us, awaiting judgment. Sarah took the lead, her voice gentle but firm. Jake, we've come to a decision. You're going to confess to the neighborhood what you've done. Jake's eyes widened in panic. What? No, I can't. They'll hate me. They might, Tom said, his tone softening slightly. But it's the right thing to do. You caused this problem, and now you need to own up to it. I stepped forward, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. It's not just about confessing, Jake. You're going to help fix this. You're going to teach the neighborhood about smart home security. Show them how to protect themselves from the very things you exploited. Jake looked at me in confusion. But I don't understand. Why would they let me help after what I did? Mark smiled wryly. Because sometimes the person who causes a problem is the best person to solve it. You have knowledge that could benefit the whole community. This is your chance to use that knowledge for good. As we explained the full plan to Jake, I could see a change coming over him. The fear and shame in his eyes were gradually replaced by determination and, dare I say it, a glimmer of hope. I'll do it, he said finally, his voice stronger than it had been all night. I'll make this right. I promise. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. We worked with Jake to prepare his presentation, helping him strike the right balance between technical explanation and heartfelt apology. Sarah and Tom reached out to the neighborhood association to arrange a community meeting. The night of the meeting arrived all too quickly. As we walked to the community center, Jake between his parents, I could see the nervous energy radiating off him. He clutched a folder of notes, his knuckles white with tension. The room was packed when we arrived, a low murmur of confusion and speculation filling the air. As Jake made his way to the front, I saw recognition dawn on several faces, followed by looks of bewilderment. Jake's voice shook as he began to speak, but with each word he seemed to grow more confident. He laid out everything he had done, sparing no detail. He explained the technical aspects of his prank, showing how easily smart home systems could be manipulated, if not properly secured. As he spoke, I watched the faces in the crowd. There was anger, certainly, and disbelief. But there was also something else: understanding. Jake's vulnerability, his willingness to face the consequences of his actions, seemed to resonate with many. When he finished his explanation, Jake paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. I know I can't undo the fear and stress I caused, but I want to make it right. I'm offering to work with each of you to secure your homes, to teach you how to protect yourselves from people like me. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, hands began to rise, not in anger, but with questions. Technical questions about security, inquiries about how to better protect their homes and families. As the meeting progressed, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. We hadn't just found a solution to Jake's mistake. We'd uncovered a way to bring our community closer together, to turn fear into knowledge and empowerment. Later that night, as we sat on our porch watching Jake excitedly explain some technical concept to Mrs. Abernathy, Sarah turned to me with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said softly, for believing in Jake, for giving him a chance to make things right. I squeezed her hand, feeling a rush of emotion. That's what community is about, isn't it? Supporting each other, even when mistakes are made. Especially then, as I looked out at our neighborhood at the people gathered in small groups talking and laughing, I realized that sometimes the greatest threats we face aren't external. They're the walls we build between ourselves and others, the assumptions we make, the connections we fail to nurture. Jake's misguided prank had torn down those walls, forcing us to reach out, to communicate, to truly see each other. In trying to make our quiet suburban life more exciting, he had inadvertently shown us the adventure that existed in simply being there for one another. And as the stars came out over our little corner of the world, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Whatever challenges we faced in the future, I knew we would face them together, as a true community. The weeks following Jake's confession and the community meeting were a whirlwind of activity. Our quiet suburban streets were transformed into a hive of tech-savvy homeowners, all eager to learn from the very teenager who had once terrorized them. Jake, true to his word, threw himself into the task of helping secure every smart home in the neighborhood. I watched from my porch one sunny afternoon as Jake, laptop in hand, explained something to Mr. Johnson, our retired military neighbor who had been one of the most vocal about involving the police. The sight of the two of them, heads bent over the computer screen, filled me with a sense of pride and wonder at how far we'd come. Sarah joined me, handing me a steaming mug of coffee. "I never thought I'd see the day," she mused, nodding towards her son and Mr. Johnson. "A month ago, I was terrified of my own home. Now look at us." I sipped my coffee, savoring the warmth. It's amazing how things can change, how people can change. Sarah's expression grew serious. "Amanda, I don't think I've properly thanked you for everything you've done for our family, for Jake. If it weren't for you..." I waved off her thanks, feeling a blush creep up my cheeks. "You would have figured it out. You're good parents, Sarah." "Maybe," she conceded. "But your idea gave Jake a chance to make things right. It gave all of us a chance to heal." As we chatted, I saw Mark's car pull into the driveway. He got out, looking tired but satisfied. He'd been working overtime at his job, trying to make up for the days he'd missed during the height of our haunting scare. "Ladies," he greeted us, dropping a kiss on my cheek. "What's the neighborhood gossip today?" I laughed, shaking my head. "No gossip, just marveling at how much things have changed." Mark's eyes crinkled as he smiled. "Speaking of change, I had an interesting conversation with Tom today." Sarah perked up at the mention of her husband. "Oh? What about?" Mark leaned against the porch railing, his expression thoughtful. "He's been thinking about Jake's skills, about how easily he was able to manipulate all those smart home systems. He's wondering if there might be a way to channel that talent into something positive." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Well," Mark continued, "Tom's company has been looking to expand their cybersecurity division. He's thinking of proposing an internship program for high school students, a way to nurture young talent and steer it in the right direction." Sarah's eyes widened. "And he's thinking of Jake for this?" Mark nodded. "He wants to talk to you both about it. He thinks Jake could be the poster child for the program. From prankster to protector, or something like that." The implications of this idea hung in the air between us. It was more than just an opportunity for Jake. It was a chance for real redemption, a way to turn his mistake into a stepping stone for a brighter future. As if summoned by our conversation, Jake bounded up the porch steps, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, Amanda, you won't believe what Mr. Johnson just told me." Sarah smiled indulgently at her son. "What is it, honey?" Jake's words tumbled out in a rush. "He said he's going to recommend me for a summer program at the local community college, a course on ethical hacking and cybersecurity. He thinks I have a real talent for it." The pride in Jake's voice was palpable, and I felt a lump form in my throat. This was a far cry from the shame-faced teenager we'd confronted just weeks ago. "That's wonderful, Jake," I said, meaning every word. You've worked hard for this. Jake's smile faltered slightly. Do you think it's okay? I mean, after everything I did? Sarah pulled her son into a tight hug. Oh, sweetheart. What you did was wrong, but it's how you've chosen to make amends that matters. You've earned this opportunity. As Jake hugged his mother back, I caught Mark's eye. He gave me a subtle nod, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. It was time to tell Jake about Tom's idea. Actually, Jake, Mark began, there might be another opportunity on the horizon for you. We spent the next hour discussing Tom's internship idea. Jake's eyes grew wider with each detail, his excitement palpable. By the time we finished, he was practically vibrating with energy. This is incredible, he breathed. Do you really think I could do it? I placed a hand on his shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. Jake, we know you can do it. The real question is, do you want to? Jake's brow furrowed as he considered the question. I do, he said finally, his voice firm. I want to use what I know to help people, not scare them. I want to make things right. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across our front yard, I found myself reflecting on the journey we'd all taken. From fear and suspicion to understanding and growth, our community had been through a transformation none of us could have anticipated. Later that evening, as Mark and I were cleaning up after dinner, he paused, a dish towel in his hands. You know, Amanda, I've been thinking. I looked up from the sink, raising an eyebrow. Uh-oh. Should I be worried? He chuckled, shaking his head. No, nothing like that. It's just, all of this with Jake and the neighborhood, it's got me wondering about our own impact on the community. I turned off the faucet, giving him my full attention. What do you mean? Mark leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. We've always been good neighbors, sure, but this experience has shown me how much more we could be doing, how much potential there is for positive change right here in our own backyard. I nodded, understanding dawning. You're thinking of getting more involved in the community? Yeah, he said, a hint of excitement creeping into his voice. I was thinking of proposing a neighborhood watch program, not just for security, but as a way to build stronger connections between everyone. Monthly meetings, community projects, that sort of thing. The idea resonated with me, stirring something I hadn't realized was there. That sounds wonderful, Mark. I think a lot of people would be interested in that. As we continued to discuss the possibilities, I felt a sense of purpose growing within me. Our quiet, suburban life, which had once seemed so mundane, now felt full of potential. The next morning I woke early, filled with a newfound energy. I made my way downstairs, planning to enjoy a quiet cup of coffee on the porch before the day began. As I opened the front door, I was surprised to see Sarah already out, watering her flowers. She looked up as I stepped outside, offering a warm smile. Good morning, neighbor. Good morning, I replied, struck by how much weight that simple greeting now carried. You're up early. Sarah nodded, setting down her watering can. Couldn't sleep. Too many ideas bouncing around in my head. I laughed, recognizing the feeling. Let me guess. You're thinking of ways to get more involved in the community, too? Her eyes lit up. How did you know? I was actually thinking of starting a neighborhood book club, a way for us all to come together, share ideas, maybe even tackle some of the bigger issues facing our community. As we chatted, more neighbors began to emerge from their homes. Mr. Johnson, out for his morning walk. The Patel family, heading off to their weekend volunteering gig. Jake, laptop under his arm, on his way to help Mrs. Abernathy set up her new smart thermostat. Looking around at these familiar faces, now filled with purpose and connection, I felt a swell of emotion. Our neighborhood had faced a crisis, one born from boredom and disconnection. But in overcoming it, we had discovered something profound. The adventure and excitement we'd been craving had been here all along, hidden in the simple act of truly seeing and supporting one another. As the morning sun climbed higher, bathing our street in golden light, I realized that our quiet suburban life had been forever changed. But it wasn't the change we had feared in those dark days of imagined hauntings. It was a change for the better, a transformation that had turned strangers into friends, isolation into community. And as I stood there, surrounded by the buzz of neighborly conversation and the promise of new beginnings, I knew that the greatest adventure of all was just beginning. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and new beginnings as I made my way down our street. It had been 3 months since the haunting incident, and our neighborhood had undergone a transformation that went far beyond the changing seasons. I paused at the corner, smiling as I watched Mrs. Abernathy emerge from her house, tablet in hand. She waved enthusiastically when she spotted me. "Amanda, dear, you won't believe what Jake showed me yesterday. I can control my entire house from this little gadget. It's like magic." I chuckled, marveling at how far we'd all come. "That's wonderful, Mrs. Abernathy. I'm glad Jake's been so helpful." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, that boy's got a bright future ahead of him. Who would have thought our little neighborhood prankster would turn into such a whiz kid?" As if on cue, Jake came jogging down the street, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. He slowed to a stop beside us, slightly out of breath but grinning from ear to ear. "Morning, Mrs. A. Amanda. Guess what? I just got an email from Mr. Johnson. He wants me to give a presentation at the next neighborhood watch meeting about the latest in home security tech. Can you believe it?" The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. "That's fantastic, Jake. You've really found your calling, haven't you?" He nodded enthusiastically. "It's amazing. I never thought I'd be excited about, well, following rules. But this ethical hacking stuff, it's like solving puzzles but for a good cause. And the internship at Dad's company is teaching me so much." As Jake continued chatting animatedly about his latest projects, I couldn't help but reflect on how much he had grown. The sullen, bored teenager who had caused so much chaos was now a confident young man with a sense of purpose. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah, who was power walking with a group of other neighborhood moms. She broke away from the group to join us, her cheeks flushed from exertion. "Morning, everyone. Jake, don't forget you promised to help the Patels set up their new smart doorbell this afternoon." Jake's eyes widened. "Oh, right. I better get going. Thanks, Mom." He took off down the street, waving goodbye as he went. Sarah watched him go, a mix of pride and amazement on her face. "Sometimes I still can't believe how things turned out," she said softly. "A few months ago, I was terrified of what the future held for Jake. And now—" I squeezed her arm gently. "He's flourishing. You and Tom should be proud." Mrs. Abernathy nodded in agreement. "That boy has become a real asset to this community. And speaking of community, Sarah, are we still on for the book club meeting tonight?" Sarah's face lit up. "Absolutely. We're discussing the power of community in the digital age. It feels particularly relevant, doesn't it?" As the two women chatted about the upcoming meeting, I excused myself and continued my walk. The neighborhood was alive with activity. Mr. Patel was teaching a group of kids how to plant fall vegetables in the new community garden, while Mark and Tom were putting the finishing touches on a little free library they'd built at the end of our street. I paused to admire their handiwork, and Mark looked up with a grin. "What do you think, honey? Ready for its grand opening?" "It's perfect," I replied, running my hand over the smooth, painted wood. "I can't wait to see it filled with books." Tom wiped his brow, looking satisfied. "You know, when you first suggested this project at the neighborhood meeting, I thought it was a nice idea. But now, seeing it come to life, it's more than just a box of books. It's a symbol of what we've become." Mark nodded in agreement. "It's funny how something so small can mean so much. Hey, did you hear about the latest development with Jake's internship?" My ears perked up. "No, what's happening?" Tom's face broke into a proud smile. "The higher-ups at my company are so impressed with the work Jake's been doing that they're talking about expanding the program. They want to offer internships to high school students in other neighborhoods, maybe even make it a citywide initiative." I felt a surge of excitement. "Tom, that's incredible. Jake must be over the moon." "He is," Tom chuckled. But you know what he said when I told him? He said he wants to be involved in selecting and mentoring the new interns. Can you believe it? My son, who 3 months ago was using his skills to terrorize the neighborhood, now wants to guide other kids away from making the same mistakes. The three of us stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of that transformation sink in. It wasn't just Jake who had changed. Our entire community had undergone a metamorphosis. As I continued my walk, I found myself reflecting on the journey we'd all taken. The fear and suspicion that had once divided us had given way to a sense of unity and purpose I'd never experienced before. Our quiet suburban life, which had once felt stifling, was now rich with connections and possibilities. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't notice the moving truck parked in front of the house at the end of the block. A young couple was directing movers, looking slightly overwhelmed. Without hesitation, I approached them, hand outstretched. "Hi there, I'm Amanda. Welcome to the neighborhood." The woman, a petite brunette with a friendly smile, shook my hand. "I'm Lisa, and this is my husband, Mike. It's nice to meet you." Mike looked around, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "This seems like a nice area. Pretty quiet, right?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, it might seem quiet on the surface, but trust me, there's always something happening here. In fact, why don't you come to our neighborhood watch meeting tonight? It's a great way to meet everyone and get involved." Lisa's eyes lit up. "That sounds wonderful. We were hoping to find a place with a strong sense of community." As I filled them in on the meeting details, I saw Mark and Tom approaching, toolboxes in hand. "New neighbors?" Mark asked, smiling warmly. "I'm Mark, Amanda's husband. This is Tom. Need any help setting up?" Mike looked relieved. "Actually, we could use some help assembling our bed frame if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all," Tom assured him. "That's what neighbors are for. And wait until you meet my son, Jake. If you have any smart home devices to set up, he's your guy." As Mark and Tom followed Mike into the house, Lisa turned to me, her expression a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Wow, everyone's so friendly here. We were worried about moving to the suburbs, you know? We thought it might be, well, boring." I smiled, thinking of all we'd been through, all we'd learned. "Trust me, Lisa, life here is anything but boring. It's an adventure every day. You just have to know where to look." That evening, as I stood in the community center, watching our newest neighbors being warmly welcomed into the fold, I felt a sense of completion. The mystery that had started our journey was long solved, but its effects continued to ripple through our lives in the most unexpected and wonderful ways. Jake was at the front of the room, confidently explaining the latest in smart home security to a rapt audience. Mrs. Abernathy was showing Lisa how to use a tablet, while Mike was deep in conversation with Mr. Johnson about the neighborhood watch program. Mark sidled up to me, slipping an arm around my waist. "Penny, for your thoughts?" I leaned into him, smiling. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. Remember when our biggest worry was that life here was too quiet, too predictable?" He chuckled, pressing a kiss to my temple. "And now?" I looked around the room, at the faces of friends and neighbors, all connected, all engaged. Now I realized that the real adventure was here all along. We just needed a little shake-up to see it. As the meeting began and our community came together to discuss plans for the future, I felt a sense of excitement building within me. Our quiet suburban life had been transformed into something vibrant and dynamic, full of possibilities. And as I listened to the buzz of conversation around me, filled with ideas for new projects and initiatives, I knew that our greatest adventures were still to come. We had faced our fears, strengthened our bonds, and in doing so, we had created something truly special, a community that was ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring, together. The warm glow of string lights illuminated our backyard as the annual neighborhood block party was in full swing. It had been exactly 1 year since that fateful night when I first heard the mysterious voices through Lily's baby monitor, setting off a chain of events that would transform our quiet suburban community. I stood by the grill, watching as Mark flipped burgers with practiced ease, the savory aroma mingling with the sound of laughter and animated conversations. Our yard was filled with neighbors, both old and new, all brought together by the bonds we'd forged over the past year. Sarah approached, balancing 2 plates piled high with salad. "Amanda, this is amazing. I can't believe how many people showed up." I grinned, taking one of the plates from her. "I know. It's a far cry from last year's party, isn't it? Remember how we barely knew anyone beyond a polite wave?" Sarah's eyes clouded momentarily with the memory. "It feels like a lifetime ago. So much has changed." As if to emphasize her point, Jake's voice carried over the crowd. He was standing near the makeshift stage we'd set up, microphone in hand, looking confident and at ease. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" he called out. The chatter died down as all eyes turned to him. "First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. A year ago, I wasn't in a great place. I made some big mistakes that affected all of you." I felt a lump form in my throat as Jake paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "But thanks to the incredible support and forgiveness of this community, I found my way. And I'm not the only one who's grown. Look around you. A year ago, we were strangers living side by side. Now, we're a real community." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I caught sight of Mrs. Abernathy dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, while Mr. Johnson stood tall, a proud smile on his face. Jake's voice grew stronger as he continued. "That's why I'm so excited to announce that the citywide internship program has been officially approved. Starting next month, we'll be welcoming 10 high school students from across the city to learn about ethical hacking and cybersecurity." Applause erupted, and I felt a surge of pride. Jake had worked tirelessly to make this program a reality, turning his mistake into an opportunity for others. As Jake stepped down from the stage, immediately surrounded by well-wishers, I noticed Lisa and Mike, our newest neighbors, standing slightly apart from the crowd. I made my way over to them, determined to make sure they felt included. "Hey there," I greeted them warmly. "How are you enjoying the party?" Lisa's eyes were wide with wonder. "It's incredible. When we moved in 6 months ago, we never imagined anything like this. The sense of community here is just, wow." Mike nodded in agreement. I have to admit I was skeptical at first. All that talk about neighborhood watch meetings and book clubs seemed a bit, quaint. But now, I can't imagine living anywhere else. I laughed, understanding completely. Trust me, I know the feeling. It took a bit of a shock to wake us all up to the potential right under our noses. Just then, Mr. Patel approached, a tray of colorful vegetables in his hands. "Lisa, Mike, you must try these. Fresh from our community garden. Amanda, you too. The tomatoes are particularly good this year." As we sampled the veggies, exclaiming over their freshness, I marveled at how far we'd come. A year ago, the idea of a community garden would have seemed like a pipe dream. Now, it was a thriving hub of activity, bringing together people of all ages to learn about sustainable living. The evening wore on, the party showing no signs of slowing down. Children darted between adults' legs, their laughter a constant backdrop to the festivities. I watched as Lily, now a precocious toddler, played with Jake's old baby monitor, babbling happily into it. Mark came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" he murmured in my ear. I leaned back against him, sighing contentedly. Just thinking about how much has changed, how much we've all changed. He chuckled softly. "Remember when we thought suburban life was boring? That we needed some excitement?" I turned in his arms, meeting his gaze. "Oh, I think we got more excitement than we bargained for. But you know what? I wouldn't change a thing." Our moment was interrupted by Tom's voice, amplified by the microphone. "All right, everyone, it's time for the main event. If you could all gather around, we have a special presentation." Curious murmurs rippled through the crowd as we all moved closer to the stage. Tom stood there, looking slightly nervous but determined. "As you all know, Our community has been through a lot this past year. We've faced challenges, overcome fears, and grown stronger together. To commemorate this journey, we've put together a little something. He gestured to a large screen that had been set up behind him. With the help of Jake's technical skills and contributions from all of you, we've created a digital scrapbook of our year. The screen flickered to life and I felt my breath catch in my throat. There we were, a year ago, looking scared and uncertain as we gathered for an emergency neighborhood meeting. The images flowed, showing our transformation, the first neighborhood watch meeting, the creation of the community garden, the little free library opening. There were candid shots too. Mrs. Abernathy triumphantly holding up her tablet after mastering a new app. Mr. Johnson and Jake deep in conversation over a laptop, children from the neighborhood working together to build birdhouses for the park. As the presentation continued, I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. Each image was a testament to how far we'd come, how much we'd grown, not just as individuals, but as a community. The final image faded in, a group shot of all of us, taken just last week at the community center. The difference from the first photo was stark. Where once there had been wary, disconnected individuals, now there was a united, joyful community. As the screen faded to black, there was a moment of profound silence. Then, spontaneously, applause erupted. I looked around, seeing tears in many eyes, accompanied by wide smiles. Tom's voice, thick with emotion, came over the speakers once more. This is us. This is our community. We've been through darkness, but we've emerged stronger, more connected, and more alive than ever before. He raised his glass high. To our neighborhood, may we never forget the power of coming together, of facing our fears, and of building something beautiful out of the unexpected. To our neighborhood, the cheer rang out, glasses clinking as we all joined in the toast. As the party continued into the night, I found myself drawn to the quiet of our front porch. I sat on the steps, looking out at our street. Porch lights glowed warmly, and the distant sound of laughter and music filled the air. Sarah joined me, settling down with a contented sigh. Quite a year, huh? I nodded, unable to find words to express the depth of my feelings. You know, Sarah continued, her voice thoughtful, when all this started with the voices and the fear, I thought our lives were falling apart. But now, looking back, I realize it was just the beginning of something wonderful. I turned to her, seeing my own emotions reflected in her eyes. It's funny how life works, isn't it? Sometimes the things we fear the most turn out to be the very things that save us. As we sat there, two friends looking out at the community we'd helped build, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. Our quiet suburban life had been shaken to its core, but from that upheaval, something extraordinary had grown. The mystery of the voices was long solved, but its impact continued to resonate through our lives. We had faced our fears, broken down walls, and in doing so, we discovered the greatest adventure of all, the joy of true connection, of being part of something larger than ourselves. As the stars twinkled overhead and the sounds of our thriving community filled the night air, I knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, we would face them together, for we had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that the heart of any community, any family, any life well lived, is the courage to reach out, to connect, and to transform our fears into the very foundation of our strength. This expanded version of Chapter 10 brings the story full circle, showcasing the transformation of the community over the course of a year. It maintains a sense of realism while highlighting the profound changes that have occurred. The chapter ends on a note of reflection and hope, providing a satisfying conclusion to the story while emphasizing the ongoing nature of community building and personal growth. The incessant buzzing of my alarm clock jolted me awake, its harsh sound cutting through the peaceful silence of my San Francisco apartment. I groaned, fumbling for my phone to silence the irritating noise. 6:30 a.m. Another day, another dollar, I thought to myself as I dragged my body out of bed. As I shuffled towards the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. Jennifer Martinez, 32, successful marketing executive, and perpetually single. Dark circles under my eyes betrayed the late nights I'd been pulling at the office. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the fatigue that seemed to cling to me like a second skin. The morning routine was a blur of shower, coffee, and hurried makeup application. By 7:45, I was locking my apartment door, ready to face another day in the cutthroat world of corporate marketing. As I turned to leave, I nearly tripped over a package sitting on my welcome mat. "What the?" I muttered, bending down to examine the unexpected delivery. It was a small, brown box, about the size of a shoebox. No return address, just my name and address printed in neat block letters. I picked it up, surprised by its weight. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. I hadn't ordered anything recently. Curiosity got the better of me. I unlocked my door and went back inside, package in hand. Setting it on the kitchen counter, I grabbed a pair of scissors and carefully cut through the tape. My heart skipped a beat as I opened the first package, confusion washing over me like a tidal wave. Inside, nestled in a bed of packing peanuts, was a single red rose and a small velvet box. With trembling fingers, I opened the box to find a delicate silver bracelet inside. "What is this?" I whispered to the empty room, my mind racing. I frantically searched for a return address, my fingers trembling as they grasped at empty air. There was nothing. No note, no explanation, just the rose and the bracelet. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I had no idea who had sent this or why. Glancing at my watch, I cursed under my breath. I was going to be late for work. Reluctantly, I closed the box and shoved it into my bag. I'd have to deal with this mystery later. The day at the office was a haze of meetings and deadlines. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting back to the mysterious package. During my lunch break, I called the local post office. "Hi, I received a package today without a return address. I was wondering if you could help me trace its origin," I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the postal worker replied, his voice tinged with boredom. "Without a tracking number or return address, there's no way for us to determine where it came from." I hung up, frustration bubbling in my chest. As I turned back to my computer, my colleague Sarah poked her head into my office. "Everything okay, Jen? You seem distracted today," she said, concern evident in her voice. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to confide in her. "I received a strange package this morning. No return address, just a rose and a bracelet inside." Sarah's eyes widened. "Ooh, sounds like you have a secret admirer." I shook my head. "I don't know, Sarah. It feels off somehow. Who sends anonymous gifts like that?" She shrugged. "Maybe it's that cute guy from accounting you've been flirting with." "Mark?" "No way." I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "He barely notices me." The rest of the day crawled by. By the time I left the office, the sun had long since set, casting long shadows across the city streets. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I quickened my pace, my heels clicking loudly on the pavement. Once safely in my car, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Get it together, Jen," I muttered to myself. "You're being paranoid." But as I drove home, my eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a car following me. The usually comforting lights of the city seemed ominous tonight, hiding potential threats in their shadows. I arrived home and double-checked the locks on my door before collapsing onto my couch. The mysterious package sat on my coffee table, a silent reminder of the day's events. I stared at it, my mind whirling with possibilities. Was it really just a secret admirer, as Sarah had suggested? But something in my gut told me it wasn't that simple. The lack of a note, the anonymity of it all. It felt more sinister than romantic. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts. My finger hovered over my brother's name. Mike was a cop. He'd know what to do. But what would I even say? Hey, I got a creepy gift and now I'm freaking out. He'd probably tell me I was overreacting. Sleep eluded me that night, my mind racing with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Every creak of the building, every distant siren had me sitting up in bed, my heart pounding. I tossed and turned, the moonlight casting eerie shadows across my bedroom. At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and padded to the kitchen. As I waited for the kettle to boil for some chamomile tea, I found myself drawn back to the package. I opened it again, examining the contents more closely. The rose was real, not silk as I had initially thought. Its deep red petals were velvety to the touch, its scent sweet and heady. The bracelet gleamed in the dim light of my kitchen. It was beautiful, with intricate filigree work. As I turned it over in my hands, I noticed something I had missed before, a tiny engraving on the clasp. Squinting in the low light, I made out the words, "The first of many." A chill ran down my spine, and I dropped the bracelet as if it had burned me. The first of many? What did that mean? More gifts? More roses? Or something worse? The whistle of the kettle made me jump, a small scream escaping my lips. I laughed nervously at my own skittishness, but the sound held no humor. As I sipped my tea, I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was just a poorly thought-out attempt at romance. Maybe someone at work was trying to surprise me. Maybe. But deep down, I knew these were just attempts to comfort myself. Something about this felt wrong, felt dangerous. The next morning, I forced myself to laugh it off, but the unease lingered like a shadow. I got ready for work, determined to put the whole thing behind me. But as I opened my front door, my resolve crumbled. There, on my welcome mat, was another package. As I left for work, carefully stepping around the new delivery, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone's watching me, their gaze burning into my back. I hurried to my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove to work, my mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Who was sending these packages? What did they want from me? And most importantly, how did I make it stop? Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The first package was just the opening move in a game I never agreed to play, a game where the stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. The day crawled by at an agonizing pace. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, half expecting it to be a message from my mysterious admirer. By the time I left the office, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. As I approached my apartment door, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The package I'd seen this morning was still there, innocuous and terrifying all at once. With trembling hands, I picked it up and let myself in, double-checking the locks behind me. I set the package on my kitchen counter, staring at it as if it might explode. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened, to pretend this wasn't happening. But curiosity and fear warred within me, and eventually, curiosity won out. Taking a deep breath, I carefully cut through the tape. Another package arrives, and this time, my blood runs cold as I recognize the contents. Inside was a framed photograph of me, taken just yesterday as I was leaving work. I was looking over my shoulder, an expression of unease clear on my face. Alongside it was a handwritten note. "You look so beautiful when you're scared, Jennifer." A strangled gasp escaped my lips and I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair in my haste to get away from the package. This was no longer just creepy, it was a threat. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. I think I'm being stalked. I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. Can you elaborate on that, ma'am? Are you in immediate danger? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I've been receiving packages, anonymous packages. The first one had a rose and a bracelet, but this one has a picture of me. A picture I didn't know was taken. And a note. It's threatening. There was a pause on the other end of the line. All right, ma'am. We're sending an officer to your location. Can you stay on the line with me until they arrive? I nodded, then realized the dispatcher couldn't see me. Yes, I can do that. The next 20 minutes were a blur. I answered the dispatcher's questions mechanically, my eyes never leaving the package on the counter. When the knock on the door came, I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Ms. Martinez, this is Officer Ramirez with the SFPD. Can you open the door?" I peered through the peephole, confirming the officer's identity before letting him in. Officer Ramirez was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Can you show me the packages you mentioned?" he asked, pulling out a notepad. I led him to the kitchen, pointing out both packages. As he examined them, I hugged myself tightly, trying to stop the trembling that seemed to have taken over my body. "And you have no idea who might be sending these?" Officer Ramirez asked, his pen poised over his notepad. I shook my head. "No, I can't think of anyone who would do this." He nodded, jotting something down. "Any ex-boyfriends? Disgruntled co-workers? Clients who might have taken a special interest in you?" "No, nothing like that," I said, racking my brain for any possibility. "I haven't dated anyone seriously in over a year, and I get along well with my co-workers. As for clients, I interact with a lot of people in my job, but nobody stands out as particularly obsessive." Officer Ramirez's expression was sympathetic but slightly skeptical. "I understand this is distressing, Ms. Martinez, but without more concrete evidence of a threat, there's not much we can do at this point." I stared at him in disbelief. "Not much you can do? There's a picture of me that I didn't know was taken. Isn't that evidence?" He sighed, closing his notepad. "Unfortunately, taking pictures in public isn't illegal. The note is concerning, yes, but it doesn't explicitly threaten harm. We can file a report, but until we have more to go on, our hands are tied." Their dismissive attitude leaves me feeling more alone than ever, tears of frustration stinging my eyes. So what am I supposed to do? Just wait until this person decides to do more than send creepy packages? Officer Ramirez's expression softened. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you want to hear. My advice would be to be extra vigilant. Change up your routines, maybe stay with a friend for a few days. Document everything. If anything else happens, anything at all, call us immediately." After the officer left, I sank onto my couch, feeling utterly defeated. The packages sat on my coffee table, a tangible reminder of the threat looming over me. I pulled out my laptop, determined to find some answers. I spend hours researching similar cases online, my stomach churning with each horrifying story I uncover. Stories of stalking victims who were dismissed by law enforcement until it was too late. Stories of escalating behavior, of violence, of lives destroyed. As I read, a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This was real. This was happening to me, and I had no idea how to stop it. A knock at my door made me yelp in surprise. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. It was Sarah from work. "Jen, are you in there? I've been calling you all evening." I opened the door, relief washing over me at the sight of a friendly face. Sarah took one look at me, and her expression changed from annoyance to concern. "Oh my God, Jen, what happened? You look terrible." I ushered her inside, quickly locking the door behind her. The whole story came pouring out of me in a rush of words and tears. Sarah listened, her eyes widening with each new detail. "Jesus, Jen," she breathed when I finished. "This is serious. Are you sure you're safe here alone?" I shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. I don't feel safe anywhere right now." Sarah's jaw set in determination. "Pack a bag. You're staying with me for a few days." "I can't impose—" I started to protest, but Sarah cut me off. "This isn't a request, Jennifer. I'm not leaving you alone here." Gratitude washed over me, bringing fresh tears to my eyes. As I packed a few days' worth of clothes and essentials, Sarah examined the packages. "Have you considered hiring a private investigator?" she asked. "They might be able to do more than the police at this point." I paused, considering. "I hadn't thought of that. Do you think it would help?" Sarah nodded. "It's worth a shot. I have a friend who used one during her divorce. I can get you her number." As we left my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. every passerby a possible stalker. I clutched my bag close to my chest, my knuckles white with tension. In Sarah's car, I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. As we drove through the nighttime streets of San Francisco, I stared out the window, lost in thought. "We'll figure this out, Jen," Sarah said softly, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You're not alone in this." I managed a weak smile, grateful for her support, but unable to shake the dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. As night falls, every shadow in my apartment seems to hide a potential threat, and I realize I'm losing control. Even in the safety of Sarah's guest room, sleep eludes me. I toss and turn, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. Who was doing this to me? What did they want? How far would they go? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswerable and terrifying. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this, jumping at shadows and fearing every package that arrived at my door. I would fight back. I would find out who was behind this, and I would make it stop. Little did I know my determination would be put to the test sooner than I expected. The game was escalating, and the next move would push me to my limits. The next few days passed in a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. Sarah had been an angel, insisting I stay with her until we could figure out what to do. But even her comforting presence couldn't completely ease the knot of fear that had taken up permanent residence in my stomach. On the third day of my self-imposed exile, Sarah and I were having breakfast when my phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Mrs. Goldstein. "Jennifer, dear, there's another package for you. Should I bring it over to Sarah's?" My hand froze midway to my mouth, the spoon clattering back into my bowl of cereal. Sarah looked up, concern etched on her face. "Jen? What is it?" I showed her the text, my hands shaking. "It's happening again." Sarah's expression hardened. "Tell her to bring it here. We'll open it together." An hour later, Mrs. Goldstein arrived, a kind-faced woman in her 60s who looked worried as she handed over the package. "Are you all right, dear? You look pale," she said, patting my arm. I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mrs. Goldstein. Just a little under the weather. Thank you for bringing this." As soon as she left, Sarah and I stared at the innocuous brown box on the coffee table. It was larger than the previous ones, about the size of a shoebox. "Do you want me to open it?" Sarah offered. I shook my head. "No, I need to do this." With trembling hands, I cut through the tape. The third package contains something so personal I feel violated in the deepest sense of the word. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a delicate white nightgown. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized it. It was identical to one I owned, one I had worn just last week. But that wasn't all. Underneath the nightgown was a small USB drive and a note. With growing horror, I read the handwritten message. "You look so peaceful when you sleep, Jennifer. I hope you enjoy our home movie." A strangled sob escaped my lips as I dropped the note, stumbling backward until I hit the wall. Sarah was at my side in an instant, her arm around my shoulders. Jen, what is it?" I couldn't speak, just pointed at the box with a shaking hand. Sarah read the note, her face paling. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Jen, we need to call the police, now." This time, when we called, they took us seriously. Within an hour, 2 detectives were sitting in Sarah's living room, examining the contents of the package. Detective Lisa Chen was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, while her partner, Detective Mike Reeves, was younger and seemed more empathetic. "Ms. Martinez," Detective Chen began, her voice crisp and professional. "Can you think of anyone who might have access to your apartment? Ex-boyfriends, maintenance workers, neighbors?" I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "No, I'm always careful about locking up, and I haven't given my key to anyone." Detective Reeves leaned forward, his expression gentle. "What about the nightgown? Is it exactly like one you own?" "Yes," I whispered, wrapping my arms around myself. "I wore it just last week." The detectives exchanged a look that made my stomach churn. "Ms. Martinez," Detective Chen said slowly, "we're going to need to examine your apartment, and we'll need to view the contents of this USB drive." Panic grips me as I realize the stalker knows intimate details about my life, my past, my secrets. You think he's been in my apartment? That he's recorded me?" Detective Reeves nodded grimly. "It's a possibility we need to consider. Do you have a laptop we can use?" Sarah brought out her MacBook and we all gathered around as Detective Chen inserted the USB drive. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. The video that popped up made my blood run cold. It was footage of me sleeping in my bed. The camera angle suggested it had been taken from the corner of my bedroom. As we watched in horrified silence, the video showed me tossing and turning, completely unaware of the invasion of privacy. "Oh God," I choked out, burying my face in my hands. Sarah wrapped her arm around me, pulling me close. Detective Chen paused the video, her expression grim. "Ms. Martinez, I'm sorry, but we're going to need to take this as evidence. We'll also need to sweep your apartment for hidden cameras." The next few hours were a blur. The detectives accompanied me back to my apartment, where a team of crime scene technicians combed through every inch of my personal space. They found 3 hidden cameras, one in my bedroom, one in the living room, and one in the bathroom. Each discovery felt like a physical blow, leaving me feeling more violated and exposed. As the technicians worked, I sank onto my couch, feeling numb. Detective Reeves sat next to me, his voice gentle. "Ms. Martinez, Jennifer, I know this is overwhelming, but I need to ask, is there anyone in your past who might hold a grudge against you? Someone who might want to punish you in some way?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No, I can't think of anyone. I've always tried to be kind to people. I don't understand why someone would do this to me." Detective Reeves nodded sympathetically. "Sometimes stalkers aren't motivated by revenge or anger. Sometimes it's an obsession that has nothing to do with the victim's actions. We're going to do everything we can to find this person, Jennifer. In the meantime, we'll have a patrol car drive by your apartment regularly, and I'd strongly advise you to stay with your friend for a while longer." After the police left, I felt hollowed out, as if all my energy had been drained away. Sarah helped me pack more clothes and essentials, neither of us speaking much. The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. Back at Sarah's apartment, I finally broke down. Sobs racked my body as the full impact of what was happening hit me. Sarah held me, murmuring soothing words, but I could hear the fear in her voice too. I reach out to friends, my voice breaking as I confide in them, desperate for support and understanding. Over the next few days, I called my closest friends and family, trying to explain the nightmare I was living through. My brother Mike, the cop, was furious. "I'm coming to San Francisco," he declared. "You shouldn't be alone right now." "Mike, you can't just leave your job," I protested weakly. "Watch me," he growled. "This is family, Jen. Nothing's more important." My best friend from college, Aisha, was equally supportive. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm booking a flight right now. We'll get through this together." Their concern is palpable, but I can see the doubt in their eyes, and it cuts me to the core. Even as they promised support and love, I could hear the unspoken questions. How did this happen? Why didn't you notice sooner? What did you do to provoke this? I knew they didn't mean to, but their reactions made me feel even more isolated. How could I explain the terror of knowing someone had been watching me in my most private moments? How could I convey the feeling of violation that went beyond physical boundaries? That night, I dream of faceless figures chasing me through endless corridors, waking up in a cold sweat. Sarah rushes in, alerted by my screams. Jen, it's okay, you're safe. It was just a dream," she says, holding me as I shake. But we both know it's more than just a dream. It's a manifestation of the very real threat hanging over me. As dawn breaks, I sit by Sarah's window, watching the city come to life. People hurrying to work, joggers out for their morning run, all blissfully unaware of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors. I think about the person behind this, the one who's been watching me, invading my privacy, terrorizing me. Who are they? What do they want? And most importantly, how far are they willing to go? A chill runs down my spine as I realize this is far from over. The personal nature of this latest package, the escalation of the stalker's actions, it all points to something bigger, something even more terrifying on the horizon. As the sun rises, casting a deceptively cheerful glow over the city, I make a silent vow. I will not be a victim. I will fight back. I will reclaim my life from this faceless terror. Little do I know the battle ahead will test every ounce of my strength, pushing me to limits I never knew I had. The game has changed, and the stakes are higher than ever. But I'm ready to fight. I have to be. My life depends on it. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of determination. The fear was still there, a constant undercurrent in my thoughts, but it was now accompanied by a fierce resolve. I wouldn't let this unknown tormentor win. Over breakfast, Sarah and I discussed our next steps. I think we should hire a private investigator, Sarah suggested, pushing a business card across the table. Remember I mentioned my friend used one during her divorce? This is the guy. I picked up the card, reading the name aloud. Marcus Delgado, private investigator. Sarah nodded. He's supposed to be the best. Ex-cop. Great track record. What do you think? I hire a private investigator, hope fluttering in my chest like a caged bird. Let's do it, I said, reaching for my phone. An hour later, we were sitting across from Marcus Delgado in his downtown office. He was a stocky man in his 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything. So, Ms. Martinez, he began, his voice gruff but not unkind. Tell me everything from the beginning. Don't leave out any details, no matter how small they might seem. I took a deep breath and started talking. I told him about the first package, the bracelet, the rose. I described the photograph, the nightgown, the USB drive. As I spoke, Delgado took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, we need to retrace your steps over the past few months. Any new people in your life? Changes in routine? Anything out of the ordinary? I shook my head. Not really. I mean, work has been busier than usual, but nothing significant. Delgado nodded. All right, we'll start with your workplace. Can you get me a list of all your clients and coworkers from the past year? I think so, I said, my mind already racing through the possibilities. I'll need to check with HR, but it shouldn't be a problem. Good, Delgado said, standing up. I'll also need access to your social media accounts, email, phone records, the works. This guy's been watching you for a while. We need to figure out where he first made contact. As we retrace my steps over the past few months, a chilling realization begins to dawn on me. How long had this been going on? How many casual interactions could have been the starting point for this nightmare? Over the next few days, I worked with Delgado, providing him with every scrap of information I could think of. We pored over my calendar, my emails, my social media interactions. Each innocent coffee date, each business meeting, each casual conversation with a stranger on the street now took on a sinister potential. On the third day of our investigation, Delgado called me into his office. His expression was grim. "Jennifer," he said, his voice serious, "I think we've found something." My heart raced as I sat down. "What is it?" Delgado pushed a file across his desk. "Take a look at this." I opened the file with trembling hands. Inside was a series of photographs, all of me. Some were clearly taken from a distance, me leaving work, getting coffee, jogging in the park. Others were more intimate, taken through windows or from hidden vantage points. "Oh God," I whispered, my voice shaking. How did you get these?" Delgado's expression was sympathetic but determined. They were uploaded to a private server. It took some doing, but we managed to trace the IP address. The investigator's words confirm my worst fears, and I feel the ground crumbling beneath my feet. "You know who it is?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. Delgado shook his head. "Not yet, but we're close. The IP address leads back to a coffee shop near your office. It's a start." I nodded, trying to process this information. "So what now?" "Now," Delgado said, leaning forward, "we set a trap. We're going to catch this bastard in the act." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Delgado set up surveillance at the coffee shop, while I tried to go about my normal routine, hyper-aware of every glance, every interaction. It was during this time that I decided to take matters into my own hands as well. I spent hours poring over old client files, my heart racing as I searched for a connection. There had to be something I was missing, some clue that would unlock this terrifying puzzle. As I flipped through file after file, a pattern began to emerge. Several of our more difficult clients had been handled by the same account manager, a man named Eric Lawson. I vaguely remembered him. Quiet, efficient, a bit of a loner. I picked up my phone, my hands shaking slightly as I dialed Delgado's number. "Delgado," he answered on the second ring. "It's Jennifer," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think I might have found something. There's this former employee, Eric Lawson. He handled a lot of our problem clients, and I remember he left the company rather suddenly about 6 months ago." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Good work, Jennifer. I'll look into it right away. In the meantime, don't do anything on your own. This guy could be dangerous." I agreed, but even as I hung up the phone, I knew I couldn't just sit and wait. I needed answers. Against my better judgment, I decided to do some digging of my own. I reached out to HR, asking for Eric Lawson's file under the guise of a routine audit. As I opened the file, a name jumps out at me, and suddenly the pieces start falling into place with terrifying clarity. Eric Lawson had been fired for inappropriate behavior towards a client whose case I had taken over. My hands shook as I picked up my phone again, this time to call Sarah. "Sarah," I said as soon as she answered, "I think I know who it is." "What?" "Jen, slow down. What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "The stalker. I think it's a former employee named Eric Lawson. He was fired 6 months ago for harassing a client whose case I took over." Sarah's sharp intake of breath was audible even over the phone. "Oh my God, Jen. Have you told Delgado?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I just figured it out. I'm going to call him now." "Okay, but Jen, promise me you won't do anything stupid. Let the professionals handle this." I promised, but even as I said the words, a plan was forming in my mind. I needed to confront this, to end it once and for all. As I hung up the phone, a notification pinged on my computer, an email from an unknown sender that makes my blood run cold. The subject line read, "I see you've been doing some digging, Jennifer." With trembling fingers, I opened the email. Inside was a single line of text. "Two can play at this game. Are you ready to up the stakes?" Attached was a photo of me, taken just moments ago through my apartment window, hunched over my laptop with Eric Lawson's file clearly visible on the screen. Terror gripped me, but beneath it was a steely determination. This had to end, and it had to end now. I picked up my phone once more, this time to call Delgado. As it rang, I stared at the email, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. "Delgado," came the gruff voice on the other end. "It's Jennifer," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk. I think I know who the stalker is, and he knows that I know." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Stay where you are," Delgado ordered. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything, don't contact anyone, just wait for me." As I hung up, I looked out my window at the bustling city below. Somewhere out there, Eric Lawson was watching, waiting, planning his next move. But this time, I was ready. The game had changed, and I was no longer just a pawn. The investigation had begun in earnest, and with it, a new chapter in this terrifying saga. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I would face it head on. The time for fear was over. Now, it was time to fight back. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Delgado arrived with 2 of his associates, turning my apartment into a makeshift command center. They set up surveillance equipment, tapped into my computer, and began tracing the email I'd received. As Delgado worked, I sat on my couch, feeling simultaneously relieved and terrified. The waiting was excruciating. "Got something?" one of Delgado's associates called out. We all huddled around his laptop. The face staring back at me from the computer screen sends shivers down my spine. I remember him. Eric Lawson's personnel file photo stared back at us, his unremarkable features belying the terror he'd inflicted on my life. "That's him," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "That's Eric Lawson." Delgado nodded grimly. "We've got an address. I'm calling in some favors with the SFPD. We'll have a team ready to move within the hour." As Delgado made his calls, I found myself lost in thought, memories flooding back. Memories of our brief interaction flood back, and I'm overwhelmed by a sense of guilt and fear. I remembered Eric now. Quiet, efficient, always lurking on the periphery of office gatherings. I'd never paid much attention to him, but now every interaction took on a sinister new light. There was one memory in particular that stood out. It was at the company Christmas party, about 7 months ago. Eric had approached me, a glass of champagne in his hand. "Great job on the Henderson account, Jennifer," he'd said, his voice soft but intense. "I've been watching your work. You're really something special." At the time, I'd brushed it off as an awkward attempt at networking. Now the words "I've been watching" took on a whole new, terrifying meaning. I was jolted out of my reverie by Delgado's hand on my shoulder. "Jennifer, we're ready to move. I want you to stay here with Sarah. We'll call as soon as we have him in custody." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As Delgado and his team left, Sarah pulled me into a tight hug. "It's almost over, Jen," she whispered. "You're going to be okay." The next hour was the longest of my life. Sarah and I sat in silence, jumping at every sound, our eyes glued to our phones. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my phone rang. It was Delgado. "Jennifer." His voice was tight with tension. "We've got a problem. Lawson's not at his apartment, but we found evidence that he's been planning this for months. There are photos, notes, detailed schedules of your movements. This guy is seriously unhinged." My heart sank. "So what now?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Now we go to Plan B. We need to draw him out. Are you up for that?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "What do you need me to do?" Delgado outlined his plan. It was risky, but it was our best shot at catching Lawson. I agreed, despite Sarah's protests. The next day, I went about my normal routine, hyper-aware of every shadow, every passing stranger. Delgado and his team were watching, but I'd never felt more exposed. As I left work that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You look lovely today, Jennifer. That red blouse really brings out the fear in your eyes." My hands shaking, I showed the text to Delgado, who was waiting in an unmarked car nearby. "This is good," he said, his eyes scanning the street. "He's watching. Now we just need to get him to make a move." Following Delgado's instructions, I made my way to a nearby cafe, one I frequented often. As I sat down with my latte, I pulled out my phone and made a show of making a call. "Hi, it's Jennifer Martinez," I said into the phone, my voice loud enough to be overheard. "I'm calling about the restraining order I filed. I think I've identified the man who's been stalking me." I paused, as if listening to a response. "Yes, his name is Eric Lawson. He's a former co-worker. I'm scared. I think he might try something." As I hung up the fake call, I scanned the cafe, my heart pounding, and then I saw him. Sitting in the corner, partially hidden behind a newspaper, was Eric Lawson. The face staring back at me from behind the newspaper sends shivers down my spine. I remember him. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a small smile that chilled me to my core, he stood up and walked out of the cafe. I reach out to Delgado, my voice trembling as I ask for the next steps. "He was here," I whispered into my phone. He heard everything. "What do I do now?" Delgado's voice was tense but controlled. "Stay calm. We've got eyes on him. Follow the plan. Go home, act normal. We'll be watching." I nodded, forgetting he couldn't see me, and made my way home. Every step felt like I was walking through molasses, my senses hyper-alert to every sound, every movement around me. Once home, I went through the motions of my evening routine, all the while feeling like a performer on a stage, knowing that somewhere, Lawson was watching. As I settled on my couch with a book I couldn't focus on, my phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "Clever girl, trying to set a trap. But you should know by now I'm always one step ahead. Check your email." With trembling fingers, I opened my laptop. There, in my inbox, was an email from Lawson. The subject line read, "Let's end this game." I clicked it open, my breath catching in my throat. Inside was a video attachment. With a sense of dread, I pressed play. The video showed me, in my apartment, talking to Delgado and his team. It had been filmed just hours ago, from an angle that suggested a camera hidden in my bookshelf. Below the video was a message. "I know all about your little plan, Jennifer. If you want this to end, meet me tomorrow night. Come alone, or I start sending these videos to everyone you know. You have 24 hours to decide." I reached out to my old company, my voice trembling as I asked for information about the former client Eric had harassed. "This is Jennifer Martinez," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need some information about a former client. It's related to a police investigation." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry, Ms. Martinez, but we can't disclose client information without proper authorization." Their reluctance to help fills me with a mixture of frustration and dread, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever. "Please," I begged, "this is important. I think I might be in danger." "I'm sorry," the voice repeated, sounding genuinely regretful. "But we have strict privacy policies. We'd need a court order to release any information." As I hung up the phone, a notification pings on my computer. An email from an unknown sender that makes my blood run cold. It was from Lawson again. "Trying to dig up dirt on me, Jennifer? That's not very nice. Remember, I have eyes everywhere. Your move." I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. How did he know? How was he always one step ahead? In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't keep playing by the rules. If Lawson wanted to end this game, then that's exactly what we'd do. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and dialed Delgado's number. "Delgado," he answered on the first ring. "It's Jennifer," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Lawson's made contact. He wants to meet." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Jennifer, listen to me. Whatever he's threatened, whatever he's promised, do not meet him alone. This is exactly what we've been waiting for. We can set a trap, end this once and for all." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "I know, but Delgado, he's always one step ahead. He knew about our plan. He has videos, recordings. If we don't do this his way, he'll release everything." "We can handle that," Delgado insisted. "Your safety is what matters here." But even as he spoke, I knew what I had to do. "I'm sorry, Delgado, but I need to end this my way." Before he could protest further, I hung up. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was firm. Tomorrow night, one way or another, this nightmare would end. As I sat there staring at my phone, I realized that the game had changed once again. Lawson thought he was in control, that he held all the cards, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. Tomorrow night, Eric Lawson would learn just how dangerous a cornered prey could be. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The next 24 hours were a blur of preparation and anxiety. I knew Delgado and his team were scrambling to find a way to intervene, but I had turned off my phone and locked myself in my apartment. This was my fight now. As the hour of the meeting approached, I stood in front of my mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. Dark circles under my eyes, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, dressed all in black. I looked like a woman going to war. In a way, I suppose I was. Just as I was about to leave, my laptop pinged with a new email. The email contains a video that turns my world upside down, leaving me gasping for air. With trembling hands, I clicked play. The video showed a live feed of Sarah's apartment. She was sitting on her couch, completely unaware that she was being watched. A chill ran down my spine as I read the accompanying message. "Change of plans, Jennifer. Come to the address below. Remember, if I see any sign of the police or your private detective friend, Sarah pays the price. You have 1 hour." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about me anymore. Lawson had raised the stakes, and now Sarah's life was on the line too. I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, my mind racing. I knew I should call Delgado, tell him what was happening. But the risk was too great. I couldn't gamble with Sarah's life. The address Lawson had sent led me to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. As I pulled up, the sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. I watch in horror as the stalker reveals his twisted plan, my mind reeling from the implications. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my car and approached the warehouse. The rusted metal door creaked ominously as I pushed it open. "Hello, Jennifer," a voice echoed through the cavernous space. "I'm so glad you could make it." Eric Lawson stepped out of the shadows, a sinister smile playing on his lips. He looked different from how I remembered him, wilder, more unhinged. In his hand, he held a smartphone, the screen displaying the live feed of Sarah's apartment. "Let her go, Eric," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is between you and me." Lawson's smile widened. "Oh, but Jennifer, don't you see? This has always been about so much more than just you and me. This is about justice." "Justice?" I repeated, incredulous. "How is terrorizing me justice?" "You took everything from me," Lawson shouted, his calm facade cracking. "That client. You believed her lies, didn't you? You all did. I lost my job, my reputation, everything. And for what? Because some rich bitch couldn't handle a little flirting?" I took a step back, my heart pounding. "Eric, whatever happened with that client, this isn't the way to handle it. Please just let Sarah go and we can talk about this." Lawson laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the warehouse. "Talk? Oh, we're well past talking, Jennifer. No, now it's time for you to understand what it feels like to lose everything." Determined to take control, I set up elaborate security measures, my hands shaking as I install each device. I had come prepared. While Lawson was focused on his rant, I slowly reached into my pocket, pressing the panic button on the small device Delgado had given me before I went off the grid. "What do you want from me, Eric?" I asked, trying to keep him talking, to buy time. Lawson's eyes gleamed with a manic light. "I want you to confess. Admit that you ruined my life. Admit that you were wrong about me, and I want it all on camera." He gestured to a setup in the corner, a video camera on a tripod pointed at a chair. "And if I do this," I said slowly, "you'll let Sarah go?" Lawson nodded. "Of course. I'm not a monster, Jennifer. I just want the truth to come out." Every sound, every shadow makes me jump, paranoia seeping into every aspect of my life. But I forced myself to stay calm, to think rationally. I needed to keep Lawson talking, to keep him distracted until help arrived. I walked over to the chair, sitting down in front of the camera. Lawson followed, positioning himself behind the camera with his phone still in hand, the image of Sarah a constant reminder of the stakes. "Whenever you're ready, Jennifer." Lawson said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. I took a deep breath, looking directly into the camera. My name is Jennifer Martinez, and I have a confession to make. Lawson leaned forward eagerly, his eyes wide with anticipation. I've been living in fear, I continued. Fear of a man who couldn't handle rejection, who couldn't face the consequences of his own actions. A man who chose to terrorize an innocent woman rather than take responsibility for his mistakes. Lawson's face contorted with rage. That's not what you're supposed to say, he shouted. What am I supposed to say, Eric? I shot back, my own anger finally bubbling to the surface. That I'm sorry you harassed a client? That I'm sorry you faced the consequences of your actions? I'm not sorry. The only thing I'm sorry about is that I didn't see how dangerous you were sooner. Just when I think I'm safe, another package arrives, proving that nowhere is truly secure. But this time the package wasn't physical. It was the realization that I had underestimated Eric Lawson. His face twisted into a snarl as he lunged towards me. I barely had time to react, throwing myself sideways as Lawson crashed into the chair. We grappled on the ground, his hands reaching for my throat. I fought back with everything I had, knowing that my life, and Sarah's, depended on it. Suddenly, the warehouse door burst open with a deafening crash. Police! Freeze! Lawson's grip loosened in surprise, and I took the opportunity to knee him in the stomach. As he doubled over, I scrambled away. Delgado was there in an instant, hauling Lawson to his feet and cuffing him. Other officers swarmed the warehouse, securing the scene. Jennifer, Delgado called out, "Are you all right?" I nodded, still catching my breath. "Sarah," I gasped. "He has Sarah." Delgado shook his head. "Sarah's safe. We had a team at her apartment the whole time. Lawson's feed was pre-recorded." Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. It was over. It was finally over. As the officers led Lawson away, he turned to me one last time. "This isn't over, Jennifer," he spat. "You haven't seen the last of me." I stood tall, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Yes, Eric, it is over. You've lost. And the only place I'll be seeing you is in court." In the aftermath, I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. Delgado approached, his face a mix of concern and admiration. "That was a hell of a risk you took," he said, sitting down next to me. I nodded. "I know, but I had to end it. I couldn't live in fear anymore." Delgado was quiet for a moment. "You know, in all my years on the force and as a PI, I've never seen anyone handle a situation like this the way you did. You're one tough lady, Jennifer Martinez." I managed a small smile. I had to be. He didn't leave me any choice. As the adrenaline wore off, the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. Tears welled up in my eyes, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself break down. Delgado put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's over now. You're safe. And Jennifer, you won. Remember that." I nodded, wiping my eyes. He was right. I had won. Eric Lawson had tried to break me, to control me through fear. But in the end, he had failed. I was stronger than he could have ever imagined. As I watched the police cars drive away, Lawson safely in custody, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The nightmare was over, but the journey wasn't. I knew I had a long road ahead. Therapy, rebuilding my sense of security, learning to trust again. But for the first time in months, I felt hope. Hope for a future free from fear. Hope for a life reclaimed. The game had changed, but I had changed with it. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. And whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. As I got into Delgado's car to go give my official statement, I took one last look at the warehouse. This place that had been meant to be the site of my downfall had instead become the stage for my greatest triumph. The sun was rising, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold. A new day was dawning, both literally and figuratively, and I was ready to face it head-on. The weeks following Eric Lawson's arrest were a blur of police statements, legal meetings, and therapy sessions. I was determined to put the pieces of my life back together, but the process was far from easy. Every unexpected sound still made me jump, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. It was during one of my therapy sessions that Dr. Amelia Chen, my psychologist, made a suggestion that would change everything. "Jennifer," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I think it might be beneficial for you to confront Eric directly, to face your fear head-on." I stared at her, my heart racing at the mere thought. "Confront him? You mean, see him in person?" Dr. Chen nodded. "It's called restorative justice. Sometimes facing our tormentors in a controlled environment can be incredibly empowering. It can help you reclaim your sense of control." I left the session with my mind whirling. The idea of seeing Eric again terrified me, but a small part of me was intrigued. Could confronting him really help me move on? After days of internal debate and long discussions with Sarah and Delgado, I made my decision. I decide to face my fear head-on, arranging a meeting with the stalker that sets my nerves on fire. The day of the confrontation arrived all too quickly. As I waited in the small room at the correctional facility, my heart pounded so loudly I'm sure everyone can hear it. Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You don't have to do this, Jen," she said softly. "We can leave right now if you want." I shook my head. "No, I need to do this. For myself." The door opened, and 2 guards escorted Eric Lawson into the room. He was dressed in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked smaller somehow, less threatening than I remembered. As I see him approach, a complex mix of emotions threatens to overwhelm me: fear, anger, and a strange sense of relief. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "Hello, Eric." He nodded slightly. "Jennifer, I have to admit, I'm surprised you wanted to see me." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I'm here because I need answers, Eric. I need to understand why you did what you did." Eric's expression hardened. "Why? You took everything from me, Jennifer. My job, my reputation, my future. I wanted you to feel the same fear and helplessness that I felt." I leaned forward, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "I didn't take anything from you, Eric. Your actions, your choices, those are what cost you everything. Our conversation is a dance of half-truths and veiled threats, leaving me more confused and terrified than ever." Eric's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't understand. That client, she lied about everything. I was just being friendly and she twisted it into something it wasn't." "Even if that were true," I countered, "it doesn't justify what you did to me. You terrorized me, Eric. You made me fear for my life, for the safety of my friends." Eric leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "And yet here you are, facing me. I have to admit I underestimated you, Jennifer." I felt a surge of strength at his words. "Yes, you did. You thought you could break me, but you only made me stronger." For a moment I saw a flicker of something in Eric's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or maybe just surprise. But it was quickly replaced by his usual cold stare. "So what now?" he asked. "You've faced your boogeyman. Do you feel better? More in control?" I considered his question carefully. Did I feel better? The fear was still there, a constant undercurrent in my thoughts. But alongside it was something new, a sense of power, of agency. "I do," I said finally, he said. "Not because I'm not afraid anymore, but because I'm facing that fear. I'm here, Eric, despite everything you did to me. I'm still standing." Eric's facade cracked slightly, and for a brief moment I saw the lost, angry man beneath the monster he'd become. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said softly. "I just wanted... I don't know what I wanted." I leaned forward, my voice firm. "It doesn't matter what you meant, Eric. What matters is what you did. And now you have to face the consequences of those actions." As he walks away, I'm left with a chilling promise that makes me question everything I thought I knew. Eric stood up, the guards immediately moving to his side. But before they could lead him away, he turned to me one last time. "This isn't over, Jennifer," he said, his voice low and intense. "You might think you've won, but remember, I know you now. I know how you think, how you react, and knowledge is power." A chill ran down my spine at his words, but I refused to let him see how much they affected me. I stood up, meeting his gaze steadily. "You're right, Eric. Knowledge is power, and now I know you too. I know that beneath all your threats and manipulation, you're just a scared, angry man who couldn't handle rejection. And that knowledge, that's my power over you." The guards led Eric away, but his last words echoed in my mind long after he was gone. Sarah put her arm around me as we left the facility. "You were amazing in there, Jen," she said. "How do you feel?" I took a deep breath, considering the question. Honestly, I'm not sure. Part of me feels stronger, like I've taken back some of the control he stole from me. But another part is still scared. Sarah finished for me. I nodded. "It's okay to be scared," she said gently. "What you went through, it's not something you just get over. But Jen, you faced him. You stood up to him. That's incredibly brave." As we drove home, I found myself replaying the conversation with Eric in my mind. Despite his final threat, I realized that I did feel different. The fear was still there, but it no longer consumed me. I had faced my tormentor and come out the other side. That night, as I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was different from the one I'd seen just a few months ago. There was a strength in her eyes, a determination in the set of her jaw. I realized that Eric was right about one thing. This wasn't over, but not in the way he meant. This was just the beginning of my journey to reclaim my life, to rebuild my sense of safety and trust. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As I climbed into bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Delgado. "You did good today, kid. Remember, you're not alone in this fight." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. He was right. I wasn't alone. I had Sarah, Delgado, Dr. Chen, and so many others in my corner. And more importantly, I had myself, stronger and more resilient than ever before. The confrontation with Eric had changed the game once again, but this time, I was the one changing the rules. No longer would I be defined by what had been done to me. Instead, I would be defined by how I chose to move forward. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not let Eric's final threat haunt me. Instead, I would use it as fuel, driving me forward into a future of my own making. A future where I was not a victim, but a survivor, a warrior. The game had changed, but so had I. And this time, I was ready to win. In the weeks following my confrontation with Eric, I found myself driven by a newfound determination. The fear was still there, lurking in the shadows of my mind, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it fueled me, pushing me to take back control of my life in ways I never thought possible. One sleepless night, as I sat at my kitchen table nursing a cup of chamomile tea, an idea struck me. If Eric had been able to dig into my life so thoroughly, why couldn't I do the same to him? Fueled by a newfound determination, I began my own investigation into the stalker's past. The next morning, I called Delgado. "Jennifer," he answered, his voice tinged with concern. "Everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "I need your help, Delgado. I want to investigate Eric Lawson's past." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Jen, are you sure that's a good idea? The trial is coming up and—" "I need to do this," I interrupted. "I need to understand. Please, Delgado. You're the only one who can help me do this safely." I could almost hear him weighing the options in his mind. Finally, he sighed. "All right, kid. But we do this my way. No risks, no confrontations. Deal?" "Deal," I agreed, feeling a surge of excitement and apprehension. Over the next few weeks, Delgado and I dug deep into Eric's past. We combed through public records, interviewed former colleagues and acquaintances, and pieced together a picture of the man who had terrorized me. Each revelation about his life is like a puzzle piece, slowly forming a picture that both fascinates and horrifies me. We discovered that Eric's obsessive behavior wasn't new. There had been complaints at previous jobs, restraining orders from ex-girlfriends that had been quietly settled out of court. But it was when we started looking into his family history that things took an unexpected turn. "Jennifer," Delgado said one evening as we pored over documents in his office, "I think I found something." I looked up from the file I was reading. "What is it?" Delgado pushed a document across the desk to me. Eric had a sister, Amanda Lawson. She died 15 years ago. I scanned the document, my brow furrowing. Suicide? Delgado nodded grimly. Apparently she had been stalked by an ex-boyfriend. The police didn't take her complaint seriously and, well, I felt a chill run down my spine. "Oh my God, do you think this is why he targeted you?" Delgado finished. "It's possible. Maybe in some twisted way, he saw himself as protecting you from ending up like his sister." I shook my head, trying to process this new information. "But that doesn't make any sense. He was the one stalking me." Delgado shrugged. "The human mind works in mysterious ways, especially when trauma's involved. This doesn't excuse what he did to you, but it might help explain it." I uncover a secret that changes everything, my mind racing with the possibilities it presents. As I sat there staring at Amanda Lawson's death certificate, I felt a shift in my perspective. Eric was still the man who had terrorized me, who had turned my life upside down. But now, I saw him as something else too. A broken man, shaped by his own trauma and grief. "What do we do with this information?" I asked Delgado. He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's up to you, Jennifer. We could pass it on to the prosecution, maybe use it to argue for mandatory therapy as part of his sentence, or, I prompted, or you could talk to him again. Try to understand. Maybe even offer forgiveness." I stared at Delgado, shocked. Forgiveness? After everything he did? Delgado held up his hands. "I'm not saying you have to. Hell, if I were in your shoes, I'm not sure I could. But sometimes understanding and forgiveness can be powerful tools for healing, for both parties." I left Delgado's office that night with my head spinning. The idea of forgiving Eric seemed impossible, and yet, a small part of me was intrigued by the possibility. Could understanding his motivations help me finally put this chapter of my life behind me? Armed with this knowledge, I feel a shift in the power dynamic, hope blooming in my chest for the first time in months. The next day, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called the prison and arranged another meeting with Eric. As I prepared to confront him again, I'm filled with a mixture of anticipation and dread, knowing this could be my only chance to end the nightmare. The day of the meeting arrived, and I found myself once again in the sterile visitation room of the prison. When Eric was brought in, he looked surprised to see me. "Jennifer," he said, his voice cautious. "I didn't expect to see you again." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I know about Amanda, Eric." The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked like he might be sick. Then, his expression hardened. "You had no right to dig into my past." "Like you had no right to dig into mine?" I shot back. "I needed to understand, Eric. I needed to know why." Eric's hands clenched into fists on the table. "You don't know anything. You couldn't possibly understand." "Then help me understand," I said, my voice softer now. "Help me understand why you chose to become the very thing that destroyed your sister." Eric's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. For a long moment he was silent. Then, to my surprise, I saw tears forming in his eyes. I don't know," he whispered. I thought I was protecting you. from men like the one who hurt Amanda. But somewhere along the way, I became the monster I was trying to save you from. I felt a lump form in my throat. Eric, what happened to Amanda was terrible, but it doesn't justify what you did to me. You didn't protect me. You terrorized me. Eric nodded, a tear sliding down his cheek. I know. God, I know. I'm so sorry, Jennifer. I know that doesn't change anything, but I am truly, deeply sorry. I sat there watching this broken man in front of me. The Eric Lawson I saw now was a far cry from the menacing figure who had haunted my nightmares. In that moment, I made a decision that would change both our lives. I forgive you, Eric, I said softly. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. What? I forgive you, I repeated, my voice stronger now. Not for your sake, but for mine. I forgive you so that I can move on, so that you no longer have any power over me. Eric's shoulders sagged, as if a great weight had been lifted from them. Thank you, he whispered. I don't deserve it, but thank you. As I stood to leave, Eric called out one last time. Jennifer, I know it doesn't mean much coming from me, but you're incredibly strong. Stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I nodded, a small smile playing on my lips. I know. Goodbye, Eric. As I walked out of the prison, I felt lighter than I had in months. The fear and anger that had been my constant companions for so long were still there, but they no longer controlled me. I had taken back my power, not through vengeance or hatred, but through understanding and forgiveness. That night, as I recounted the meeting to Sarah over dinner, she looked at me with a mixture of awe and concern. Are you sure about this, Jen? She asked. Forgiving him, I mean. I nodded, taking a sip of wine. I am. It doesn't mean I forget what he did or that I ever want him in my life again. But forgiving him, it's freeing. For the first time since this all started, I feel like I'm truly in control. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing my hand. I'm proud of you, Jen. You're the strongest person I know. As I prepared to go to bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one I'd seen months ago when this nightmare began. She was stronger, wiser, more compassionate. She was a survivor. I climbed into bed, feeling truly at peace for the first time in a long time. The game had changed, yes, but I had changed with it. And in the end, I had won not by defeating my enemy, but by rising above the game entirely. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized that this wasn't just the end of a nightmare. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I was no longer defined by what had been done to me, but by how I had chosen to overcome it. The tables had turned, and I was finally, truly free. 6 months had passed since my last encounter with Eric Lawson. Life had slowly begun to return to a semblance of normalcy. I had thrown myself back into my work, started volunteering at a support group for stalking victims, and even begun dating again. But despite the progress I'd made, there was still an undercurrent of unease that I couldn't quite shake. It was a crisp autumn morning when everything changed once again. I was sipping my morning coffee, scrolling through my emails, when I saw it. A message from an unknown sender, with a subject line that made my blood run cold. We're not finished, Jennifer. My hand trembled as I clicked on the email. Inside was a single line of text. Meet me at the place where it all began. Noon today. Come alone, or others will pay the price. I felt the familiar tendrils of fear creeping up my spine, but this time they were accompanied by something else. Anger. How dare he? After everything, after I'd shown him forgiveness, he was trying to drag me back into his twisted game. I stand my ground as we face off, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through my veins. I picked up my phone and dialed Delgado's number. Delgado? His gruff voice answered on the second ring. It's Jennifer, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. Eric's made contact again. He wants to meet. I could almost hear Delgado tensing up on the other end of the line. Where and when? The warehouse where you arrested him. Noon today. I paused, taking a deep breath. He says I need to come alone. Absolutely not, Delgado growled. We'll set up a perimeter, get a team in place. No, I interrupted. I need to do this, Delgado. I need to end this once and for all. There was a long pause. Jennifer, think about what you're saying. This man is dangerous. I know, I said softly, but so am I. I'm not the same woman he terrorized all those months ago. I can handle this. After a long argument, Delgado finally agreed to let me go, but on one condition: he would be nearby, ready to intervene if things went south. As noon approached, I found myself once again standing outside the abandoned warehouse. My heart was pounding, but my resolve was firm. I pushed open the rusty door and stepped inside. Eric was waiting for me in the center of the vast space. He looked different, thinner, more haggard. Prison had clearly taken its toll. Jennifer, he said, his voice echoing in the empty building. I wasn't sure you'd come. I took a step forward, my eyes never leaving his. I'm here to end this, Eric. Once and for all. His mask of control slips, revealing a vulnerability that catches me off guard and complicates my feelings. End it? He repeated, a hint of desperation in his voice. Don't you see, Jennifer? It can never end. We're connected now, you and I. I shook my head, feeling a mix of pity and revulsion. No, Eric. The only connection between us is the one you fabricated in your twisted mind. I'm here to sever that connection for good. Eric's eyes flashed with anger. You think it's that easy? You think you can just walk away from me? Yes, I said firmly. That's exactly what I think. Because I'm not afraid of you anymore, Eric. I pity you. Our verbal sparring reaches a fever pitch, each word laden with unspoken emotions and hidden meanings. Eric lunged forward, grabbing my arm. You don't get to pity me, he snarled. I held your life in my hands. I controlled you. I wrenched my arm free, my voice rising to match his. You never controlled me, Eric. You tried to break me, but you failed. All you did was make me stronger. For a moment we stood there, both breathing heavily, the tension between us palpable. Then, something shifted in Eric's eyes. The anger drained away, replaced by a look of utter defeat. Why did you forgive me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. After everything I did to you, why? I took a deep breath, considering my words carefully. Because I needed to. Not for you, but for myself. Holding on to that anger and fear was poisoning me. Forgiving you was the only way I could truly free myself. Eric sank to his knees, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he choked out. No, you don't, I agreed. But that's not the point. Forgiveness isn't about what the other person deserves. It's about choosing to let go of the pain they caused you. A moment of understanding passes between us, brief but profound, shaking the foundations of everything I believed. For a split second, I saw Eric not as the monster who had terrorized me, but as a broken, lonely man who had lost his way. I'm so sorry, Jennifer, he whispered. For everything. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. I know you are, Eric, but sorry isn't enough. You need help. Real, professional help. Will you agree to that? Eric looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. Yes, he said softly. Yes, I will. Just as I think it's over, a shocking twist sends us both reeling, changing the game entirely. The warehouse door burst open and Delgado rushed in, gun drawn. Jennifer, he shouted, are you all right? I held up my hands. I'm fine, Delgado. Everything's under control. Delgado looked between Eric and me, confusion evident on his face. What's going on here? I took a deep breath. It's over, Delgado. Truly over this time. As Delgado led Eric away, I felt a strange mix of emotions washing over me. Relief, certainly, but also a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. I had faced my tormentor not once, but twice, and I had emerged stronger each time. Later that evening, as I sat in Delgado's office giving my statement, he looked at me with a mix of admiration and concern. "You took one hell of a risk today, Jennifer," he said, shaking his head. "But I have to admit I've never seen anything like it. You didn't just face your fear. You conquered it." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. I had to, Delgado. It was the only way to truly free myself. As I left the police station, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp autumn air. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly, completely free. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sarah's number. "Jen," she answered, concern evident in her voice. "Are you okay?" Delgado told me what happened. "I'm more than okay, Sarah," I said, smiling. "I'm free. Really, truly free." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm so proud of you, Jen," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're the strongest person I know." As I walked home, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The terror, the pain, the sleepless nights, they were all part of my story now. But they didn't define me. What defined me was how I had chosen to overcome them. I had faced my deepest fears, confronted my tormentor, and emerged not just a survivor, but a warrior. The game that Eric had started all those months ago was finally, truly over. And I had won, not by playing by his rules, but by changing the game entirely. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I felt lighter than I had in months. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities. I was no longer the woman who lived in fear, who jumped at every shadow. I was stronger now, more resilient, more compassionate. I was Jennifer Martinez, survivor, warrior, and now, finally, truly free. The final showdown was over, but my journey was just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would lead me. In the aftermath of our confrontation, I'm left to pick up the pieces of my shattered reality. The weeks following my final encounter with Eric Lawson were a whirlwind of emotions and activity. There were police reports to file, therapy sessions to attend, and a life to rebuild. One crisp morning, as I sat in Dr. Chen's office for our weekly session, she looked at me with a mix of pride and concern. "Jennifer," she began, her voice gentle but probing, "how are you really feeling after everything that's happened?" I took a deep breath, considering the question. "Honestly, I'm not sure. There's relief, definitely, but also confusion, sadness. It's like I'm feeling everything and nothing all at once." Dr. Chen nodded, jotting something in her notebook. "That's completely normal, Jennifer. You've been through a traumatic experience, and now that the immediate danger has passed, your mind and body are processing everything." "Will I ever feel normal again?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Dr. Chen's eyes softened. "Normal is relative, Jennifer. You won't go back to who you were before this happened, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You've grown. You've become stronger. Now, it's about integrating this experience into your life and moving forward." As I left the session, her words echoed in my mind. Moving forward. It sounded so simple, and yet so impossibly complex. The truth, now fully revealed, is both a burden and a relief, leaving me emotionally drained yet somehow lighter. I found myself replaying my final conversation with Eric, trying to make sense of it all. Later that week, I met Sarah for coffee at our favorite cafe. As we sat down with our lattes, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "How are you holding up, Jen?" she asked, her eyes searching my face. I managed a small smile. "I'm okay. Taking it day by day, you know?" Sarah nodded, her expression sympathetic. "I can't even imagine what you're going through, but I want you to know I'm here for you. Whatever you need. Thanks, Sarah, I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. I don't know what I'd do without you. As we chatted, I found myself opening up about the conflicting emotions I was experiencing. Part of me is relieved it's over, but another part, I don't know. It's like I'm mourning something, but I can't quite put my finger on what. Sarah listened intently, her brow furrowed in thought. Maybe, she said slowly, you're mourning the person you were before all this happened. The Jennifer who hadn't gone through this trauma. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was right. I was mourning my old self, the woman who hadn't known true fear, who hadn't had to fight for her sanity and safety. As I begin to rebuild my life, I'm haunted by lingering questions and what-ifs that keep me up at night. What if I had noticed Eric's obsession earlier? What if I had handled things differently? The what-ifs were endless, threatening to drown me in a sea of doubt and regret. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I made a decision. I couldn't change the past, but I could use my experience to help others. The next morning I called the local women's shelter. "Hello, this is Jennifer Martinez," I said when the receptionist answered. I'd like to volunteer. I'm a survivor of stalking, and I want to help others who might be going through similar experiences. The woman on the other end of the line was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for reaching out. Your experience could be incredibly valuable to our clients. Can you come in for an interview next week?" As I hung up the phone, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Slowly, I start to reclaim my sense of self. Each day, a small victory in the battle against fear and paranoia. I threw myself into volunteer work, started taking self-defense classes, and even began writing about my experiences. One evening, as I was working on a blog post about healing after trauma, my phone rang. It was Delgado. "Jennifer," he said, his voice serious. "I thought you should know. Eric Lawson's trial is next month. The prosecutor wants to know if you'll testify." I felt my heart rate quicken. Testify? I don't know, Delgado. The idea of seeing him again? I know it's a lot to ask, Delgado said gently, but your testimony could make a real difference. It could help ensure he gets the help he needs and prevent him from hurting anyone else. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Delgado replied. "Take all the time you need." That night I tossed and turned, weighing my options. The thought of facing Eric again, of reliving my trauma in front of a courtroom full of strangers, was terrifying. But the thought of staying silent, of potentially allowing him to hurt someone else, was even worse. The next morning I called Delgado back. "I'll do it," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'll testify." The day of the trial arrived all too quickly. As I sat in the witness stand, my eyes met Eric's across the courtroom. He looked small, defeated, nothing like the monster who had terrorized me for so long. "Ms. Martinez," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court about your experiences with the defendant, Eric Lawson?" I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them everything. The fear, the sleepless nights, the constant paranoia. But I also told them about the strength I'd found, the resilience I'd discovered within myself. As I spoke, I watched Eric's face. I saw shame, regret, and something else. Understanding. For the first time, I truly believed he grasped the magnitude of what he'd done. When I finished my testimony, the judge looked at me with respect. "Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Your courage is commendable." As I left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had faced my fear one final time, and I had emerged victorious. In the end, I emerged changed but stronger, the experience etched into my soul like a scar, a constant reminder of the darkness I survived and the light I found within myself. Eric was sentenced to time in prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about healing for both of us. Months passed and life slowly but surely returned to a new normal. I continued my volunteer work, started dating again, and even got a promotion at work. The fear never completely disappeared, but it no longer controlled me. One sunny afternoon, as I was leaving a support group meeting, I ran into Sarah. "Jen," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug. "How are you doing?" I smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached my eyes. "I'm good, Sarah. Really good." She studied my face, her eyes widening slightly. "You know what? I believe you. You look peaceful." I nodded, realizing she was right. I feel peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I feel like myself again. Not the old me, but a new me. Stronger. Wiser. Sarah linked her arm through mine as we walked. "I'm so proud of you, Jen. You've come so far." As we strolled through the park, I reflected on my journey. The terror, the pain, the sleepless nights, they were all part of my story now. But they didn't define me. What defined me was how I had chosen to overcome them. I had faced my deepest fears, confronted my tormentor, and emerged not just a survivor, but a warrior. The nightmare that had consumed my life for so long was finally over, but the journey wasn't. I knew I had a long road ahead. Therapy, rebuilding my sense of security, learning to trust again. But for the first time in months, I felt hope. Hope for a future free from fear. Hope for a life reclaimed. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I turned to Sarah with a smile. "You know what? I think I'm ready for whatever comes next." Sarah squeezed my hand. "And whatever it is, you won't face it alone." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. She was right. I wasn't alone. I had Sarah, Delgado, Dr. Chen, and so many others in my corner. And more importantly, I had myself, stronger and more resilient than ever before. The chapter of my life dominated by fear and trauma had closed, but a new one was just beginning, one filled with hope, strength, and the unshakable knowledge that I could face anything life threw my way. As we walked home, I held my head high, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The game was over, and I had won, not by defeating my enemy, but by refusing to let fear define me. I was Jennifer Martinez, survivor, warrior, and now, finally, truly free. The resolution wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning. And I was ready to write the next chapter of my story, one of healing, growth, and triumph.